Hey guys! Tonight we are unraveling one of those sprawling Greek myths that sounds heroic on the surface, but if you look closely, is mostly about paperwork level quests, awkward family drama, and people rowing endlessly in circles. We're talking about Jason and the Argonauts. You picture moonlight sliding across a restless sea, gulls crying out above the cliffs, and somewhere in a palace nursery a newborn child cries, a child who, spoiler alert, is not going to have a normal childhood. And don't get too attached, because Greek myths rarely hand out happy endings. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this world of curses, feuds, and snakes the size of city buses. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you do, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you all are listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story begins in Iolcus, a coastal city in Thessaly, where King Aeson should have enjoyed a calm rule. But his half-brother Peleus, ever the ambitious schemer, staged a coup. You picture torches flaring, shouting soldiers rushing through marble halls, and a crown slipping from one brow to another. Poor Aeson was left powerless, and Peleus, like so many villains of bedtime stories, justified everything with that classic excuse: the gods wanted it. Historians still argue whether these coups reflected actual dynastic struggles in early Thessaly, or were mythological metaphors for shifting clan power. Either way, it meant danger for Aeson's newborn son. That baby, Jason, was just swaddled when the prophecy started swirling. Peleus had been warned to beware a man with one sandal luminous enough to make him paranoid about any nephew, cousin, or random sandaloozer wandering into town. To protect his son, Aeson pulled the oldest trick in the royal survival playbook: fake the baby's death. Imagine a staged funeral for a newborn who is actually smuggled away in the night, a nurse carrying him up mountain paths while thunderclouds close in. This wasn't just paranoia. Greek kings really did use mountain sanctuaries to hide heirs, and Pelion, the mountain chosen, was sacred ground. Up there lived the centaur Chiron, half man, half horse, and full-time tutor of wayward princelings. Jason was left in Chiron's care, surrounded by herbs, carved flutes, and the smell of pine. While most children were raised on bread and watered wine, Jason got a curriculum of music, medicine, and monster avoidance. You imagine learning archery with one hand and plucking a lyre with the other, all while trying not to step on your teacher's tail. A quirky tidbit slides in here. Ancient Greeks actually believed centaurs might symbolize tribes of horsemen who seemed inseparable from their mounts. The myth, then, may have grown from outsiders mistaking skillful riders for literal man-horses. But in Jason's bedtime story, it's less anthropology and more cozy campfire vibes, hoofbeats echoing, Chiron strumming soft chords, Jason falling asleep under a pelt of lion fur. Meanwhile, down in Iolcus, Peleus ruled with that mix of fear and charm that dictators specialize in. He built temples, sponsored sacrifices, and made sure everyone remembered the prophecy. Some storytellers even say Peleus dreamed nightly of sandals washing ashore. You can almost laugh at the image, the king waking up sweaty, because someone left their flip-flop on the beach. But superstition carried weight. Ancient Greek kings consulted oracles for everything from war campaigns to crop planting, and ignoring a prophecy was like tempting fate with a megaphone. Years passed. Jason grew strong, skilled, and maybe a little too confident. He listened to heroic ballads, threw spears at wooden targets, and daydreamed about reclaiming his father's throne. Yet tucked into all that ambition was the inevitability of tragedy, because Greek myths rarely allow anyone to escape the fate written for them. And so, even as you picture Jason running along mountain ridges, hair wild in the wind, you can sense the story's gears already grinding toward Iolcus, toward Peleus, and toward that mysterious sandal dot. By the time Jason reached adulthood, he had the look of a hero: broad shoulders, a traveler's cloak, and a restless gaze scanning the horizon. Chiron, wise as always, probably knew his student's departure was inevitable. There's an almost bittersweet image here: teacher and pupil at the mouth of a cave, dawn light spilling across the rocks, one hoof scraping the ground as if to say, "This will be the last lesson." And that's how the stage is set. A baby hidden from a murderous uncle, raised in the wilderness, groomed by a centaur. You drift on that thought, somewhere between myth and history, somewhere between lullaby and warning. Knowing Jason's sandals will soon touch the road back to Iolcus, you picture yourself years later, trudging down the slopes of Mount Pelion, pine needles crunching underfoot, a cool wind tugging at your cloak. Jason has grown from that smuggled infant into a lean, confident young man, shaped by a childhood of both hardship and privilege. Life with Chiron wasn't exactly cushy. Sure, you had safety from Pelias' spies, but imagine doing math homework while your teacher has hoofs, or trying to practice the lyre while the cave echoes every wrong note back at you. But you learned skills that most princes would never touch. You gathered herbs for medicines, memorized star paths for navigation, and practiced throwing javelins at tree trunks until the bark split like thunder. You learned which berries to eat, which ones to avoid, and how to spot the glitter of snake scales in the underbrush before they spotted you. Chiron believed in balanced mind, body, and spirit. You were drilled not just in combat, but in poetry, law, and the healing arts. In a way, your childhood was like boot camp crossed with a liberal arts degree. Now, Greek myths often make heroes sound like they went from zero to demigod overnight. But Jason's youth shows the slow, patient grind. And there's a historical echo here. Ancient Greek elites really did send their sons to be raised outside the city, toughened by rural life before returning as leaders. It's the mythic version of send your kid to summer camp so they don't grow up soft. Historians still argue whether Jason's Pelion childhood reflects real aristocratic training or just an idealized fantasy about rustic virtue, and tucked into the days of hunting lessons and flute, practice with the friendships with others under Chiron's care. Achilles would come later, but Jason may have trained alongside Asclepius, the future god of medicine, or Orpheus, the musician who could charm even stones. You imagine evenings around a fire, Jason listening to Orpheus pluck delicate notes while Chiron brewed pine needle tea. The stars overhead, endless and sharp, stitched a canopy of myth already waiting for Jason's turn. One quirky tidbit, Chiron was said to be immortal, but unlike other immortals, he actually hated it. He carried a wound that wouldn't heal, poisoned by Heracle's arrow, and in later myths he begged to trade his immortality away. So, while he taught Jason resilience, there's an odd irony you're learning from a being who secretly longed for rest. It makes you wonder if Jason absorbed not only skills, but also that quiet awareness. That glory comes tied to suffering. Picture a teenage Jason wandering off to the riverbanks, skimming stones, daydreaming about a father he barely remembers and a throne he's never seen. His life was safe but narrow, and Pelion, for all its beauty, was still a mountain cage. He wanted something bigger, something that matched the heroic songs he grew up hearing. And here comes the gentle sarcasm. Haven't we all, at 17, imagined ourselves destined for world-changing greatness while really just procrastinating chores? Jason's daydreams, though, carried a dangerous weight because somewhere in Iolcus, Pelias still twitched at every sandal sighting. The years stack up quietly, and eventually Jason becomes a man ready to leave. You sense it in the way he sharpens his spear with extra focus, in how he stares longer at the horizon. Chiron doesn't stop him. Perhaps he knew you can't keep fate locked in a cave forever. Instead, he blesses Jason with knowledge, a final embrace, maybe even a cryptic farewell like, "Remember." Wisdom steadies the oar. Jason nods, though you can bet he only half understands. The way we all half listen to advice until hindsight makes it sting. As Jason descends into the valleys below, the air changes thicker with the smoke of farms, louder with the chatter of shepherds. He's stepping from mythic childhood into messy adult politics. The sandals on his feet will carry him to a kingdom he has never seen, but already claims in his heart. You imagine him gripping his staff, every step weighted by both excitement and dread. The centaur's mountain fades behind, but its lessons echo in his stride. The strange thing about myth is that time skips in dreamy leaps. One moment you're a boy with pine sap on your hands. The next you're a man whose name drifts on prophecy. Jason's hidden childhood becomes less about hiding and more about shaping, like a slow kiln turning clay into something hard enough to weather fire. And so you drift with him down the slope, half lulled by the rhythm of his journey, already sensing that the world is waiting for that missing sandal. You keep walking with Jason as he leaves the wooded ridges of Pelion behind, and heads into the lowlands, sandals brushing against dusty paths lined with scrubby olive trees. The air is warmer here, thicker with the smell of soil and goats, and you can almost feel his anticipation. This is the road that will pull him directly toward destiny. And like most Greek heroes, his destiny is wrapped in a riddle of prophecy. The story goes that an oracle once warned Peleus to beware the man who comes wearing only one sandal. Not exactly detailed, but oracles never are. They specialize in the vague, fortune cookie phrasing that can mean 10 things at once. And so Peleus spent his reign paranoid about footwear. Imagine a king panicking every time someone showed up in mismatched shoes. Jason, though, is oblivious. He's making his way toward Iolcus to claim his birthright. Along the way, he comes to a swollen river. Maybe it's spring runoff. Maybe the gods nudged the current stronger that morning, but the water looks dangerous. He sees an old woman at the bank, frail, hunched, clearly in need of help. Without hesitation, Jason scoops her up, slings her across his shoulders, and wades in. The river is icy, pressing against his knees, tugging at his legs like a stubborn child. He grits his teeth, fights the current, and manages to carry her across. But the river snatches one sandal right off his foot. It slips away downstream, gone. Jason looks down, shrugs, and keeps walking with one bare foot slapping against the dirt road. He doesn't know it yet, but that missing sandal has just lit up the prophecy like a neon sign. Here's the kicker. The old woman wasn't just some frail traveler. She was Hera in disguise, queen of the gods, testing Jason's character. By helping her, he unknowingly won her favor. This matters because Hera, in myth after myth, doesn't hand out loyalty lightly. She usually spends her time punishing Zeus lovers. So Jason getting her on his side is like unlocking a cheat code in an otherwise unforgiving game. A quirky little tidbit here. The Greeks really did treat rivers as divine beings, giving them sacrifices and hymns. Crossing a river wasn't just a practical act, it was also a sacred one, as if you were trespassing across the body of a god. Jason's barefoot stumble might symbolize a ritual offering one sandal gifted to the river spirit in exchange for safe passage. Historians still argue whether this episode reflects a real initiation rite, a mythic dramatization of local cult practices, or simply an entertaining story detail that stuck because it was weirdly memorable. So Jason keeps walking, staff in hand, cloak sweeping, one sandal missing. Imagine how ridiculous he must look, half heroic, half sloppy tourist. He approaches the city gates of Iolcus like that, unbothered. Inside, Peleus is hosting games in honor of Poseidon, the kind of festival that blended sport, sacrifice, and plenty of wine. Crowds pack the square, athletes wrestle in dust, trumpets blare. And into this noise strides Jason, tall, confident, one sandal dangling uselessly from memory. The crowd notices first. Whispers ripple the prophecy. Peleus, perched on his throne, sees him and feels the blood drain from his face. Here it is, the moment he's been dreading since the oracle's warning. And all because his nephew couldn't keep his footwear together. You almost want to laugh, but in myth, these tiny mishaps have cosmic weight. Jason bows, formally introduces himself as the son of Aeson, rightful heir of Iolcus. Peleus listens, forced to mask his fear with diplomacy. Inwardly, though, he's already scheming. He can't outright kill Jason. Public opinion is watching. And killing a man favored by Hera is like asking for divine lightning to ruin your hairdo. So he smiles, nods, and begins plotting a way to get rid of him without looking like the villain. But for now, Jason stands steady, cloak draped, barefoot on one side, sandals secure on the other. A prophecy fulfilled in the simplest, silliest way by losing footwear in a river. Fate in Greek stories rarely roars in with trumpets. It usually sneaks up in the details, the things you'd never think twice about. and as Jason breathes the city air for the first time, you can feel the myth tightening, pulling him deeper into the web of schemes, promises, and impossible quests that will define his name. Jason stands before Pelias in the bustling square, dust on his cloak, stuff planted firmly, the missing sandal still making him look like he got dressed in a hurry. The crowd quiets around you, and the tension feels thick, like the moment before dice hit the table. Pelias studies Jason carefully, weighing every word and every gesture, because here is the living embodiment of the prophecy that's haunted him for years. Jason, meanwhile, doesn't grovel. He greets Pelias with the calm assurance of someone who knows he has a claim to something bigger. He speaks of his lineage son of Aeson, rightful heir to the throne stolen by treachery. The people murmur. Some remember Aeson fondly, others simply love a good drama. Jason's voice carries like a bard's, trained by Chiron to cut through noise. He makes his case not as a wild-eyed rebel, but as a man stepping into what is already his. Pelias, ever the politician, does not lash out. Instead, he smiles with oily charm and welcomes Jason like a long-lost nephew. He praises him for bravery, thanks him for returning, and publicly embraces him. On the surface, it looks like reconciliation, but behind the grin, Pelias' mind is spinning. He knows he cannot murder Jason outright. The gods and the people would never forgive him. He needs a way to remove Jason without blood on his own hands. And so, with the smoothness of a con artist, Pelias poses a test. He asks Jason a question in front of everyone. Asterisk if you had the power. How would you deal with an enemy who threatened your rule? Asterisk Jason, young and a little too earnest, answers honestly. Asterisk I would send him on a quest, far away, to fetch something nearly impossible. Asterisk Pelias' smile widens. Jason has walked right into his trap. With theatrical flair, Pelias declares that Iolcus suffers from a curse and only the golden fleece, hanging in a distant land called Colchis, can bring prosperity back. If Jason is truly favored by the gods, let him prove it by retrieving this divine treasure. The people cheer at the idea. It sounds heroic, glorious. But you, listening from your pillow, know it's essentially a death sentence dressed as a noble errand. Here's the historical fact woven in. Greek colonists in the Black Sea region, especially near modern Georgia, told stories of rivers where fleeces were used to sift for gold dust. Sheepskins stretched across riverbeds would trap tiny flakes of gold, glimmering like treasure. The myth of the golden fleece may have grown from that practical technique. Historians still argue whether the fleece was a real object of trade, a symbol of kingship, or just a poetic invention that stuck because shiny objects make for good storytelling. Jason, of course, doesn't flinch. Fueled by youth, destiny, and maybe a little overconfidence, he accepts the challenge. He promises to bring back the fleece and restore honor to his house. The crowd roars approval. Pelias claps along, probably thinking, asterisk perfect. This barefoot dreamer will never make it past the first storm. Asterisk a quirky tidbit. Some versions say Pelias dressed up his suggestion with solemn sacrifices, invoking Poseidon and Zeus to make it look sacred. Others say he staged the whole thing during a festival so he'd have witnesses to Jason's vow. Proof that if Jason refused, he'd look cowardly. It's the kind of political theater that wouldn't feel out of place on today's news feeds. So, the bargain is sealed. Jason is no longer just a man with one sandal. He is the chosen quester, bound by honor and prophecy to sail into the unknown. Hera, watching unseen, must have smirked at how neatly fate was falling into place. And you, drifting into the rhythm of this myth, can almost hear the oars already creaking, the sea waiting. Jason has confronted Pelias, claimed his right, and been tricked into an adventure too big to refuse. It's the classic Greek setup, a throne stolen, a hero challenged, and a quest stretching far beyond the horizon. The square in Iolcus hums with excitement after Jason's bold promise. Citizens chatter about omens, sacrifices, and the dazzling treasure said to hang far away in Colchis. But you know what's really happening? Pelias has just dumped an impossible errand in Jason's lap, wrapped it up in shiny myth and called it a civic duty. Jason, however, doesn't waver. He stands tall, cloak draped, looking like someone who believes heroic ballads always end in triumph. You, already lulled into the rhythm of the tale, know better. The golden fleece itself is more than just a pretty pelt. According to the myth, it once belonged to a magical ram that carried to children Phrixus and Hel away from danger. Hel, tragically, fell into the sea which ever after was named the Hellespont. But Phrixus survived, reached Colchis, and sacrificed the ram to Zeus. Its fleece was then hung in a sacred grove, guarded by a dragon that never slept. You picture it glimmering there, gold threads catching moonlight, like a treasure chest left in plain sight, but locked with fangs and fire. Jason's task is clear: sail to Colchis, charm or fight a suspicious king, snatch the fleece and return. Sounds straightforward until you remember geography. Colchis is at the far end of the known world, modern Georgia, on the Black Sea, so in ancient terms. It's basically that mysterious place beyond the maps where monsters eat you. No wonder Peleus smiled so confidently when he suggested it. There's also a historical undertone. Greek colonists did indeed venture to the Black Sea, lured by trade routes and mineral wealth. The Golden Fleece may symbolize that frontier spirit turning a risky expedition into a story of divine quest. Historians still argue whether Jason's journey reflects actual seafaring ventures, propaganda for colonization, or just pure campfire fantasy. Jason, though, doesn't spend long moping. He knows he'll need a crew, heroes, sailors, and maybe a demigod or two. His reputation as a would-be king helps. People love signing up for quests that sound like history-making, even if survival odds are slim. Word spreads quickly across Greece, and soon volunteers are trickling in. Heracles, Orpheus, Atalanta, Castor, Pollux. The roster swells into a who's who of mythic talent. Imagine a group chat where every hero is dropping sword emojis. Except it's the Bronze Age and group chat means showing up with a spear. But before the recruitment drive kicks off, Jason himself needs to prepare. He visits temples, sacrifices goats, and consults oracles. Always the dutiful hero, he sprinkles wine, burns fat on altars, and asks the gods for safe passage. Sacrifices weren't just ritual fluff, they were the ancient version of getting travel insurance. You don't head into monster country without covering your bases. A quirky tidbit: some Greeks used barley grains in sacrifices, tossing them into the flames as starter snacks for the gods. A little appetizer before the main course of roast thigh bone smoke. Peleus watches all this unfold with sly satisfaction. The more Jason prepares, the more convincing the quest looks, and the further Peleus distances himself from blame. If Jason dies, well, the gods demanded it. If Jason succeeds, well, Peleus will just have to deal with that later. For now, he sits smugly on his throne, certain he's rid of the prophecy's threat. Jason, meanwhile, feels the pull of destiny. You picture him standing by the sea at twilight, waves lapping, stars glittering overhead, cloak whipping in the wind. He doesn't yet know how many storms, betrayals, or tragedies wait ahead. He only knows the golden fleece gleams out there, across endless water, promising honor and homecoming. And so, with one sandal still symbolically missing, he commits himself fully to the impossible quest that will define his name. You drift with Jason now as he begins the most important stage of preparation, gathering the Argonauts. No hero sails alone, and Jason knows he needs allies. Word spreads across Greece like wildfire. A young man favored by Hera is assembling a crew to seek the Golden Fleece. It's not just a fishing trip. It's a once-in-a-lifetime shot at glory. Heroes, wanderers, and thrill-seekers start showing up, each with a reputation, each with a quirk. Heracles is the obvious headliner, towering, lion-skin draped, casually carrying a club the size of a lamppost. He joins almost as a favor. To the others, it feels like signing Michael Jordan for your rec league basketball team. Then comes Orpheus, the musician whose lyre could soothe storms and even charm stones into listening. His presence might seem like overkill for a sailing trip, but you'll be glad of him later. When songs become stronger than steel, there are also Castor and Pollux, the twin brothers, one known for horsemanship, the other for boxing. Polydeuces the boxer could knock out a man with one punch, while Castor could control wild horses with a whisper. They arrive together inseparable, sparring even as they volunteer. Atalanta shows up too, swift-footed huntress raised by bears, bow slung across her back. Some versions of the myth drop her entirely. Perhaps because the idea of a woman on a ship full of men made ancient storytellers nervous. But others keep her in, and you imagine her eye-rolling at every boastful speech. Idas and Lynceus arrive next, one brash, one sharp-eyed enough to see even underground. Then there's Zetes and Calais, the winged sons of the North Wind, literary men with feathers who could outpace storms. The list grows absurdly long, more than 50 heroes, each with a resume that could carry their own epic. Imagine trying to manage that crew. Jason's leadership is less about brute strength than about holding this circus together. A quirky tidbit: ancient Greeks loved catalogues of names. Epic poetry often pauses for long lists of who joined the army, who sailed the ships, who fought at Troy. It wasn't about narrative speed, it was about honoring local legends, giving every small town its chance to say, "Our guy was there." The Argonaut roster works like that. A mythic roll call linking communities into one shared epic. Historians still argue whether Jason's band reflects an actual coalition of tribes, pooling ships for an expedition, or just a convenient way to cram every minor hero into one crossover episode. Jason, for his part, handles recruitment with grace. He doesn't puff his chest like some warlord. He welcomes each hero, listens, and finds a place for them. Maybe Chiron's lessons stuck leadership as balance, not dominance. Hera, still watching invisibly, must have been pleased. Her chosen champion wasn't the strongest, but he could unite the strong. Meanwhile, poets later imagined the heroes gathering at Pagasae, a harbor buzzing with carpenters, priests, and curious onlookers. You picture the shoreline crowded with men carrying shields, women carrying offerings, children tugging at their mother's sleeves to get a glimpse of Heracles or Orpheus. The air rings with excitement, a sense that history, or at least a very long story, is about to launch. The strangest part is how ordinary it must have looked at first. Dozens of men camping on the beach, sharpening weapons, tuning lyres, testing wings. A ship still under construction nearby, ribs of oak rising from the sand like a skeleton being assembled. In the middle of it all, Jason moves calmly, barefoot still, cloak wrapped against the sea wind, already aware that every eye is on him. The gathering of the Argonauts isn't just a recruitment drive, it's the spark that turns one man's curse into a legend involving half the heroic talent of Greece. You can almost hear the creak of timbers, smell the pitch sealing the hull, and feel the restless energy of men who can't wait to row into danger. Jason has the crew. Now all that remains is the ship. The Argo itself is more than wood and rope, it is destiny-given shape. The shipwright entrusted with building it is Argus, whose name fittingly echoes the vessel. With divine whispers guiding him, he works oak timbers from Mount Pelion into a sleek, 50-oared galley. Every stroke of his adze, every fitted plank, feels both practical and sacred, as if the gods themselves supervise the construction. The centerpiece, though, is a gift from Athena. She brings a beam carved from Zeus's sacred oak at Dodona, a place where the god's voice was said to speak through rustling leaves. That beam is fixed into the prow of the Argo. From then on, the ship isn't just a vehicle, it's an oracle. The prow can speak, warn, or advise, which is unsettling to imagine. A boat that mutters counsel while riding waves. Sailors trust omens, and this ship has one nailed into its frame. When it is finished, the Argo stands as the greatest ship ever built, the kind of vessel that later Greeks would look back on and think, that was the beginning of real exploration. Myths often work like this. What looks like legend today once felt like memory to the storytellers. Perhaps the Argo symbolizes the first time Greeks really pushed past familiar coasts into the Black Sea, a voyage so daring it could only be explained by divine assistance. Launch day is chaos dressed as ritual. Priests sacrifice to Poseidon, incense curls into the breeze, and the heroes gather in gleaming armor. The women of Iolcus crowd the shore, some proud, some frightened, all aware that most of these men won't return. Fishermen lean on their nets to watch, old men shade their eyes against the glare on the water. Children chase each other along the sand. The Argo gleams in the sun, both ordinary wood and extraordinary promise. Jason presides. Not like a king, but like a conductor guiding an orchestra. He assigns oppositions, balancing strength and stamina, ensuring Heracles sits where his brute force won't unbalance the rhythm. He calls for silence, lifts a cup of wine, and pours a libation into the sea. The foam hisses as if Poseidon himself accepts the offering. The heroes push the ship toward the surf. At first it resists, the sand sucking at its hull. Shoulders strain, sandals slip, curses rise. Then with a groan and splash, the Argo slides into water, bobbing like a giant beast finally awake. 50 men leap aboard, oars flashing as they settle. Jason climbs the prow, cloak streaming as the ship noses outward. On shore, voices break into cheers and prayers, a thunder of farewell. Once past the harbor, the sea opens wide, glittering and endless. The oars dip in unison, blades biting the surface, rhythm building under Orpheus's lyre. Imagine being there, wind in your face, salt spray on your lips, every muscle taut with expectation. Ahead lies only uncertainty. Behind, the land shrinks, its safe harbors already fading. You are part of something no one has ever done before. And yet, despite the grandeur, the first night aboard feels startlingly ordinary. Men argue over rations, stumble into each other's sleeping spaces, mutter complaints about sore backs. Heracles snores like a thunderstorm. Someone drops a shield with a clang that sets everyone on edge. The Argo rocks gently, reminding them all that this isn't a feast or a tournament, it's a journey. Long, dangerous, exhausting. The glamour already begins to peel. Still, there is a strange comfort in the shared struggle. The ship becomes a floating village, each man finding his rhythm, each oar stroke binding them closer. And at the center, Jason young, untested, but holding steady, keeping the vision clear. The Argo sails eastward, the coast of Thessaly slipping by. The quest has officially begun, and there is no turning back. The first stretch of sea feels like an introduction to a much larger book. You sit on the benches, the oar warm in your hands, watching the coastline scroll past like an endless mural. Every dip and rise of the shore seems familiar and foreign at once. For most of these men, it's the farthest they've ever been from home, and the air carries that nervous excitement you'd recognize from a modern airport departure lounge. People pretending to be calm, but secretly calculating what they've forgotten to pack. Orpheus sets the tone, literally. His lyre drifts above the splash of oars, weaving rhythm into rowing. They say even stones once followed his music. So imagine how much easier he makes 50 men keep time. The hull shudders less, the strokes even out, and the voyage feels coordinated, like one long heartbeat. Without him, you suspect half the crew would have pulled in chaos. The ship spinning circles while Heracles grumbled. Days bleed together into a hypnotic pattern, sunrise blazing across water. Midday heat scorching bronze helmets, nights where stars spill overhead like spilled salt. You snack on dried figs, salted fish, and barley cakes that taste more like desperation than delight. Still, there's camaraderie in sharing them. Everyone knows hunger tastes less sharp when mocked together. The Argo itself shows quirks quickly. The talking prow Athena's divine O-cutters faint murmurs at night. Some swear they hear guidance. Others hear only wood groaning against waves. A few men mutter nervously that ignoring it could be deadly, while others argue it's only creaking timbers. Historians still argue whether the talking Argo reflects real sailor superstitions. The way groaning ropes and hulls can sound like voices on long voyages. Either way, it keeps the crew jumpy, straining ears at shadows dot by the second week tempers flare. Heracles mocks lesser rowers for flagging. Atalanta responds by outpacing him deliberately, silent grin flashing. Castor and Polydeuces argue about who ties knots more skillfully, until they nearly fistfight with loose rope. Jason lets it boil. Perhaps wisely better they clash early, learn each other's edges. Then later, when stakes are mortal, then comes the first test. The Argo drifts near Lemnos, an island that should smell of hearth smoke but instead feels eerily empty. No men walk its shores, no fishing boats rock in its coves. Only women appear, dressed as warriors, watching the ship. It's unsettling, the reversal an entire island where men have vanished. Here the myth grows peculiar. The women of Lemnos had murdered their husbands, either because the men neglected them for foreign captives or because of a curse from Aphrodite. Accounts differ, and scholars still debate whether this story reflects actual ritual myths about islands of women, or simply a dramatic warning about the dangers of neglecting cult duties. Whatever its root, the island feels charged with unease. The women welcome the Argonauts, perhaps too eagerly. They invite them ashore, drape them in garlands, ply them with wine, and whisper promises of rule, of comfort, of no need to risk distant seas. For restless sailors, it is paradise on a platter. Many falter, eyes softening at offers of hearths instead of harbours. Jason himself dallies with Hypsipyle, queen of Lemnos, who suggests he could stay, rule beside her, and forget old Peleus entirely. You feel the tug, warm beds, soft voices, full tables. But quests don't pause forever. Heracles, gruff and practical, finally snaps them out of it. He calls them cowards, shakes them like a coach yelling at half-time. We didn't leave home to play house. He bellows, dragging them back to the ship. Without him, the golden fleece might still be a rumour. With Jason sipping Lemnian wine to this day, so the Argo sails again, leaving behind broken-hearted women and the faint smell of flowers clinging to cloaks. That first temptation so early reminds you how thin the line is between glory and drifting into comfort. The horizon stretches on, water endlessly folding, stars guiding silently. You're no longer merely setting out, you're truly on the road now. A band of strangers learning to move as one body across an indifferent sea. As the Argo presses eastward, the salt begins to cling to your skin like a second garment. Days blur or dip, waves slap, gulls wheel overhead. You almost forget that land exists at all until a new shore rises, hazy with dawn light. The prow, that oak-hearted oracle, creaks as if in warning. Soon you learn why the island ahead is home to King Cyzicus and the Doliones, people known for their hospitality. Jason steers the Argo into their harbour, and the scene is almost suspiciously wholesome, fishermen waving, children splashing along the shore, the king himself welcoming them with gifts. After the tense Lemnian interlude, the crew practically melts with relief. Feast tables groan under roasted meats, jugs of wine, baskets of fruit so sweet they sting your teeth. You feel like you've stumbled into a travel commercial. For a while, things are good. The Argonauts swap stories with locals, learn currents and coastlines, even receive supplies. Jason thanks King Cyzicus warmly, promising safe friendship. But here is where myth takes its cruel turn, reminding you that comfort rarely lasts. That night, after sailing away, a storm drives the Argo back. Blinded by rain and darkness, the crew stumbles ashore in confusion. The Doliones mistake them for raiders returning to plunder. Weapons clash, shouts rise, torches flare. You, in the chaos, can barely tell friend from foe. Bronze rings on bronze, arrows whistle, and somewhere Orpheus's lyre strings snap, cutting off the rhythm that once bound the crew. By dawn, horror dawns too. Among the slain lies King Cyzicus, the very man who welcomed them with open arms. His blood stains the sand, his crown rolled loose. Jason and his men stare in shock, realizing they have killed their ally through sheer misrecognition. It is the kind of mistake no apology can fix. The Doliones, grief-struck, wail over their dead king. The Argonauts, equally shattered, help bury him with honor. Jason weeps openly, a raw reminder that this quest is not just heroics but also unbearable cost. Historians still argue whether this episode reflects some garbled memory of real conflicts between Greek traders and local Anatolian kings, a kind of mythologized colonial guilt written into the story. Whatever the explanation, the lesson is sharp. Good intentions mean little against fate's darker humor. They hold funeral games, a strange blend of penance and honor. Wrestling matches, foot races, contests of skill all staged beside a fresh grave. Heracles wins his bouts with laughable ease, tossing men like sacks of olives. Atalanta races with the speed of a storm wind, nearly beating her male rivals, though some grumble she cheated simply by being untouchable. You watch uneasy, aware this is mourning disguised as spectacle, a way to turn grief into structure. The Argo departs again, but the mood has shifted. Silence hangs heavier at night. Jokes falter quicker, laughter dies sooner. Death has already boarded the ship, uninvited but here to stay. You sense everyone rowing a little harder, as if trying to outpace their own gilt dot at sea once more. Storms prowl the horizon. Lightning forks across the sky, rain pelts, waves lift the Argo like a toy and slam it down again. Water sloshes into the hull faster than it can be bailed. You grip the rail, knuckles white, wondering how ancient sailors survived without radar, engines, or even Dramamine. A quirky tidbit here, some Greek sailors actually carried small amulets carved with squids, or dolphins, believing these little charms would keep storms away. You wish one now sat in your pocket dot when at last the clouds break, a rainbow arcs wide, and the crew breathes again. The Argo has passed its first true storm, battered but afloat. The talking prow groans approvingly, as though even the gods acknowledge the entrance still. The memory of Cyzicus clings like damp clothing. You can't shake it. The voyage is no longer innocent. Every coastline now feels edged with shadow, every kindness fragile as glass. You row on, knowing more storms of sea and of soul wait ahead. The sea seems quieter after Cyzicus, as if the gods themselves pause to see whether the Argonauts have learned their lesson. You row in long silence, broken only by the creak of timbers and the slap of oars. The shoreline scrolls by, dotted with rocky coves and hills that glimmer faintly in the sun. Somewhere on that horizon, more trials wait. You feel it in your bones. The same way sailors today swear they can sense storms hours before clouds appear. Sure enough, the Argo drifts toward the land of the Bebrycians, ruled by King Amycus. The man is infamous towering, broad as a ship's mast, fists like hammers. His hobby, forcing every visitor to box him, and not in the friendly, sports arena way. He fights to kill. Think of him as the worst possible gym bro, the one who demands spot me. Bro before flattening you? Jason would prefer diplomacy, but Amycus storms the beach, demanding a challenger. It's Polydeuces, also known as Pollux, who steps forward. One of the Dioscuri twins, he's trained in boxing since boyhood, a favorite of trainers across Greece. His twin caster fights with horses and spears, but Polydeuces? His fists are poetry in motion. The match begins in a makeshift ring. The entire crew forming a circle, shouting wagers while the Bebrycians cheer their king. Amycus lunges like a boulder rolling downhill, swinging with terrifying power. You flinch at each blow, half convinced Polydeuces will fold. But he dances back, nimble, dodging with a smoke that infuriates his opponent. The fight stretches, long sweat dripping, sand spraying, knuckles cracking dot at last. Polydeuces lands a decisive strike. Amycus staggers, collapses, and lies unmoving in the dust. Silence falls heavy. Did the great king truly fall to one clean punch? You'd expect the Bebrycians to riot, but instead they scatter leaderless, unwilling to avenge a bully they feared more than loved. For once, violence has solved a problem cleanly. The Argonauts, however, take it as a sign. Here is proof that skill can outmatch brute force, that balance and training trump raw rage. Historians still argue whether this episode reflects Greek boxing traditions, possibly even echoing Olympic contests where fists bound in leather thongs drew blood. Some scholars suggest Amycus symbolizes untamed barbarism crushed by Greek discipline. Either way, the story lingers, another marker on the Argonauts' odyssey. After the match, the crew rests. They refill water jars, barter for supplies from nervous locals, and share stories around fire. Heracles teases Polydeuces relentlessly. Next time, maybe wrestle a mountain, while Orpheus strums tunes to ease tension. It's a fleeting return to camaraderie, the sort that comes only after shared danger. But fate wastes no time. Soon after, the Argo skirts another coast, where Heracles himself faces a turning point. The giant, restless even by hero standards, decides to pause the voyage. His companion Hylas, a beautiful youth, wanders inland to fetch water. There, nymphs seize him, some say gently, some say violently, dragging him beneath the surface. Enamored by his beauty, Heracles searches desperately, roaring through woods, tearing trees from roots, but Hylas is gone. When dawn breaks, the Argo sails without Heracles. Whether the crew abandoned him or he refused to leave, versions differ. Historians still debate whether this moment explains why Heracles isn't part of later episodes. Was it a narrative excuse, or a fragment of older myths patched together? Regardless, the mighty hero vanishes from this story, leaving an absence as heavy as stone. The ship feels smaller without his bulk, quieter without his booming laughter. Some men whisper relief, fewer quarrels, fewer broken oars, but most sense a whole, as if losing Heracles foreshadows more losses to come. Even gods, it seems, allow grief to trail close behind glory. That night, you lie awake, listening to the prow's faint murmurs. The stars glitter coldly, waves sigh against the hull, and the Argo presses on, carrying fewer souls than before, yet bound still for Colchis. The Argo glides onward, its crew smaller now but bound tighter by necessity. Without Heracles' thunderous presence, the benches feel strangely balanced, though morale dips like a slack sail. You row under skies so wide they seem to bend, the horizon curving until sea and heaven blur. Each man keeps his rhythm, muscles aching, eyes always darting toward distant shores. Wary of what trick the gods might spring next, the next shore brings not kings or boxers, but prophecy. The Argo drifts into the waters near Thrus, a rugged land where mountains claw against clouds. Here lives Phineus, a blind prophet, once favored by the gods but cursed for revealing too much. His punishment is cruel. The harpies torment him, swooping down to snatch or foul every meal. Imagine being constantly dive-bombed by giant, half-bird, half-woman creatures every time you try to eat. It's like living your life under a ceiling fan that drops pigeons instead of air. When the Argonauts meet Phineus, the man is frail, his ribs sharp under skin, his hands trembling. He begs for help, his voice carrying both wisdom and hunger. Jason agrees, partly out of pity, partly out of recognition prophecy could be a valuable compass in waters this unknown. So, the crew sets a trap. Zetes and Calais, the winged sons of Boreas, position themselves near Phineus as he sits before a simple table of bread and meat. Right on cue, the harpies screech down, wings battering the air, claws snatching at food. But this time, they are met with a counter-rush of feathers and fury. The Boreads chase them across the sky, swords gleaming, until the monsters flee far beyond the horizon. Whether they're killed or merely banished, his unclear myth leaves the edges deliberately blurred. For the first time in ages, Phineus eats in peace. Grateful, he offers the Argonauts what they most crave, knowledge of their route. He warns them of the simple gades, the clashing rocks, to massive cliffs that smash together whenever a ship tries to pass. No vessel has ever survived. Phineus advises a trick: release a dove first. If it survives, row with all speed. If not, well, you probably won't survive this. The crew listens, shivering at the thought. The idea of mountains themselves moving, colliding like jaws, it feels absurd yet terrifying. Historians still argue whether the simple gades were mythic metaphors, for treacherous currents at the Bosporus or for actual volcanic activity. Either way, they loom ahead like the ultimate sailor's nightmare. Before they leave, Phineus adds smaller omens. Beware of deceit, trust music when all else fails. Never underestimate the will of gods who play games with mortals. His words cling like sea mist, leaving Jason quieter than usual. You sense the weight settling on him. Every choice now stretches between disaster and miracle. The Argo sails once more, but now the crew rows with sharper focus. Ahead lies the threshold into a new world, one that swallows weaker sailors whole. Nights bring restless dreams, cliffs grinding together, feathers scattering, voices in the dark. Even Orpheus's lyre sounds thinner, its strings carrying unease as much as comfort. As you drift half asleep under stars, you hear the prow murmur faintly again. This time, though, the sound seems almost clear, a whisper that urges patience, courage, and the certainty that some passages can be made only by faith in timing. Whether divine or imagination, you can't tell, but you cling to it, knowing the rocks are near. By dawn, sea spray tastes sharper, gulls will higher, and the water narrows. Somewhere ahead, unseen but felt, the simple gades wait. The Argo slides into narrowing waters, and the crew rows in uneasy silence. The Bosporus strait stretches ahead, a liquid throat leading east. But what grips your gut isn't the geography, it's the dread of the simple gades. The clashing rocks rise from mist, looming slabs of granite, and even at a distance you swear they twitch, leaning ever so slightly as if eager for prey. The sound is worst, a deep groan of stone on stone, grinding like teeth in a giant's jaw. Jason recalls Phineas's advice. He orders a dove released, its feathers catching sunlight as it darts forward. For a heartbeat, the bird looks free, its wings flashing white. Then the cliffs snap together with a roar, spray leaping skyward like shattered glass. The crew gasps, some nearly dropping their oars. But when the rocks part again, the dove emerges on the far side alive, though its tail feathers have been clipped by stone. A close shave, but survival nonetheless. That tiny miracle stiffens every back on deck. Jason shouts the order. Oars dig deep, muscles surge, and the Argo shoots forward, prow aiming straight at doom. Spray blinds your eyes, thunder drowns your ears. The cliffs begin their dreadful lean inward. Timbers rattle, seams groan, and the oak prow itself mutters encouragement. You're rowing for life now, lungs burning, arms trembling. The rocks swing closer. Shadows swallow the ship. You could reach out and scrape your knuckles against jagged cliff face. Or splinter, rowers cry out, the deck tilts as waves hurl you sideways. Then, with a bone-shaking crash, the cliffs smash together just as the Argo slips through. Her stern timbers clipped, splinters flying. The ship survives barely. Behind you, the rocks grind once more, then drift apart, strangely still. Some say that after the Argo passed, they froze forever, no longer clashing, their fury spent. You slump against the bench, chest heaving, heart pounding. Relief floods like wine after drought. The Argonauts cheer raggedly, some laughing hysterically, others weeping openly. Orpheus plucks a trembling tune, the notes wavering but steady enough to stitch nerves back together. The significance isn't lost on anyone. This was the threshold, the gateway between the known Aegean and the unknown Black Sea. Crossing it marks the voyage as something entirely new. Historians still argue whether the simple gades reflect actual treacherous currents at the strait, or whether they symbolized the fear of venturing into the Black Sea Ocean that to early Greeks felt as alien as the moon. Whatever their origin, the myth immortalizes that first terror of stepping into uncharted waters. For a quirky aside, sailors in antiquity sometimes carried jars of honey not just for food, but as emergency caulking. If the hull cracked, they'd smear honey along the seams, sticky enough to slow leaks until port. You imagine someone clutching a honey jar nervously during the clash, praying it wouldn't be needed. Once through, the sea opens wide. The Black Sea stretches like a dark mirror, vast, wine-churned, whispering of lands few Greeks had ever seen. The coastlines are different here, pine forests thick to the shore, rivers that gush with silt, skies that feel somehow heavier. You row with the sense of entering a new chapter, one written in strange alphabets and guarded by gods who don't care for Greeks. At night, the stars seem sharper, as if cut from darker cloth. Jason walks the deck quietly, checking knots, speaking with Argus the builder, staring often at the horizon. He knows this isn't a boy's adventure anymore. Each man on board feels it, to that sense of being swallowed by something larger than themselves. The Argo drifts eastward, the creak of wood now sounding less like complaint and more like pride. You survived the simple gades. The sea accepts you, at least for now. The Argo sails deeper into the Black Sea, its timbers still trembling from the gauntlet of the simple gades. Every man aboard feels the shift like crossing an invisible border into a world where the rules are different, harsher, stranger. The coastline is wilder, forests pressing right to the water's edge, rivers foaming with silt. The wind tastes colder, as if the sea itself resents intruders. You row under skies that seem just a little less Greek, a little more alien. It doesn't take long for the next trial to appear. The Argo drifts toward the river Ars, sacred to the war god. Here, on a desolate island, stands a shrine tended not by priests but by deadly guardians, the Stymphalian birds. You've probably heard of them from Heracle's labours metal-feathered. Bronze-beak creatures that dive like arrows and strike like daggers. Imagine angry drones with talons shrieking in surround sound. The heroes approach cautiously. The birds swarm, darkening the sky with a flurry of wings, their screeches piercing as metal on glass. Oarsmen dug, shields rise, and feathers rain down, embedding inward like spears. You clutch the railing, heart hammering, as the air itself seems to sharpen. Jason shouts orders, trying to hold formation, but chaos threatens. Then Orpheus steps forward. He lifts his lyre, plucks strings that cut through the din. His music spreads like a net, soft but irresistible. The birds falter mid-flight, their wing beats staggering. Some scatter, some flee entirely, as though the melody untangles the rage in their blood. It's absurd yet effective, a battle won not by sword but by song. You smirk, realizing that in myth, even murderous pigeons bow to a really good playlist. Once the skies clear, the Argonauts collapse in relief. Jason leads them ashore to the shrine itself, stones blackened with age, offerings scattered, the air thick with the residue of sacrifice. They leave gifts to ours, hoping to placate him. The talking prow creaks approvingly, as if the god notes their respect. Here, a strange moment occurs. The heroes encounter for brothers, known as the sons of Phrixus. Yes, that Phrixus, the boy who once escaped on the golden ram, the very creature whose fleece now hangs in Colchis. These brothers, stranded by storm, explain their lineage, weaving the quest into deeper roots. For Jason, it's a reminder that this isn't random wandering. The threads of myth are tangled tightly. The crew takes the sons aboard, swelling their ranks again. You notice the way men glance at them, half respectful, half wary, as though destiny itself just joined the ship. They carry the scent of Colchis, of the fleece, of the endgame still far ahead. Nights on this stretch feel heavier. The Black Sea is fickle. One evening calm as glass, the next whipped into frenzy. Lightning flickers on horizons like watchful eyes. You pull your cloak tighter, listening to Orpheus play quieter tunes now. Melodies meant less for birds and more for weary men. Historians still argue whether these episodes birds, shrines, stray princes reflect actual coastal encounters, like colonies of seabirds mistaken for monsters, or whether they're narrative padding stitched into the journey. Quirky detail, ancient geographers noted that certain capes on the Black Sea really did swarm with aggressive gulls and cormorants, notorious for dive-bombing sailors and stealing food. In a way, the Stymphalian birds might just be exaggerated seagulls with better PR. Still, in myth, nothing is ordinary. Every island, every flock, every storm is the god's test. And you, weary but unbroken, row onward, aware that each new dawn brings another riddle. The Argo presses east again, leaving the shrine of ours behind, the cries of birds echoing faint in memory. Ahead lies Colchis, though still distant, waiting like a final boss you know is there but aren't ready to face. The Argo moves steadily, prow cutting into the restless waters, and every league forward feels like tightening a noose. You sense it in the way the men sit quieter, conserving not just strength but spirit. The air grows damp, filled with the tang of marshlands and the resin of pine that drifts from distant wooded coasts. At night, the stars seem tilted, constellations slightly skewed, as if the heavens themselves remind you that you are no longer in the world you knew. Colchis, always Colchis. The name hums in the air like static. You can almost taste it, though days still lie between. Jason paces the deck at odd hours, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting Hera herself to appear. She does not. The gods are rarely so generous with clarity. And then, as if the sea conspires to remind you who holds the leash, a storm surges without warning. The sky bruises into black, thunder growls, and rain lashes so hard it stings. The Argo groans under the strain. Men bail water in frenzied rhythm, muscles burning, voices hoarse from shouting. You cling to whatever you can, salt water mixing with sweat. The sense that a single wrong or stroke could end it all. In the middle of the chaos, a vision or perhaps hallucination flickers at the masthead. Hera and Athena watching, not intervening, not rescuing, merely judging. You understand then, the storm is not a mistake. It is deliberate, a whetstone for your endurance. And somehow the ship survives. At dawn, soaked and spent, the crew drifts into calmer seas, eyes hollow but alive. The storm breaks nothing, it merely carves deeper lines of determination into each face. Days later, the Argo makes landfall at the Isle of the Amazons. Here, myth takes another strange turn. The Amazons, warrior women devoted to ours, are not hostile this time. Perhaps they are wary, perhaps respectful of the gods' larger games. The Argonauts tread carefully, leaving offerings, avoiding conflict. You imagine the awkward silence, burly men unsure whether to boast or bow, women measuring them with eyes as sharp as spear points. The encounter passes like a strange dream, a brush with another mythic current docked from there. The ship presses onward to the land of the Chalybs. These people live not by farming or herding, but by iron. Sparks flash from their forges. Smoke stains the sky, hammers ring without pause. For the Argonauts, weary of salt and storms, it must feel like docking at the edge of industry itself. No one lingers long. The Chalybs are known for their grim focus, uninterested in trade or chatter. You watch from the rail, marveling that even in myth, some peoples are simply too busy working metal to notice heroes' dot necks. The Argo skirts the territory of the Mossynoeci, a people whose customs seem bizarre to Greek eyes. They invert norms, celebrating what others hide, hiding what others celebrate. To you, it's a reminder. Myth loves strangeness, loves making the foreign feel uncanny. The Argonauts observe, uncomfortable, and row away quickly, eager for more familiar terrors. Nights grow quieter after this string of encounters. The ship creaks like an old storyteller clearing his throat. Men huddle in small groups, polishing weapons, muttering plans. But always with the same conclusion, the fleece. It is the star toward which every oar-stroke pulls. The reason all these odd detours are endured. Orpheus plays softer songs now, but you notice he chooses themes of home-familiar chords, fragments of lullabies. Even warriors need reminding of what waits beyond the horizon. His music lays a quilt over the restless minds, and for a few hours, men sleep as though they never left Thessaly. Scholars later would argue that this section of the void reads like travelogue half geography, half anthropology. Perhaps it reflects actual Greek encounters with distant tribes, filtered through exaggeration and myth. Or perhaps it is padding, narrative breath before the storm of cultures. But to you, living it, each stop feels like a rehearsal, new people, new dangers, new customs, each teaching the Argonauts how to adapt. And then, at last, the river Phasis, wide, sluggish, gleaming like a dark mirror. Beyond its banks, culture stretches, land of Ates, king and keeper of the fleece. The Argo drifts in quietly, as if even the waves hesitate. You feel it immediately, the sense of arrival, the weight of destiny coiling tighter. Every man aboard knows this is the threshold. No more side quests, no more wandering. This is the confrontation that crowns the entire voyage. You lean against the railing, staring upriver. Somewhere beyond lies the fleece, golden and radiant. Somewhere beyond lies Medea, the princess who will change everything. Somewhere beyond, triumph and betrayal wait hand in hand. The prow creaks softly as if the ship itself braces. And you, silent and sleepless, drift toward the heart of the myth. The Phasis river curls dark and sluggish beneath you, and the Argo slides through reeds that whisper against her hull. Morning mist clings low over the water, muting the sunrise so it feels like you are entering not a kingdom but a half-dream. The crew falls quiet, even the most talkative men hush as Colchis looms closer. You can almost hear their thoughts clattering like loose armor after all this. Will Ates hand over the fleece, or will blood stain the riverbanks? Jason stands at the prow, jaw tight, knuckles white on the railing. He's rehearsing lines in his head, no doubt how to sound brave, diplomatic. Not like a desperate man who promised a king he'd achieve the impossible. His shoulders droop when he thinks no one watches, but you do. You realize that the greatest test for him is not swinging a sword, it's standing before a ruler and convincing him not to swat you like an insect. When the Argo moors, emissaries are sent ahead. Culture spreads before you, rich farmland edged by forests, smoke rising from forges, shrines to Hecate hidden in groves. The locals eye you with suspicion. Word travels fast here, strangers are never neutral. Some scholars later claim Colchis was a reflection of the real kingdom at the edge of the Black Sea, a place Greeks half knew through trade. Others argue it is pure invention, a mythical foil to Greek order. Historians still argue whether Colchis, Was a feared rival state or simply an exotic stage set? Then comes the fateful audience. Eights appears, robes heavy with embroidery, beard streaked with iron grey, crown gleaming with barbaric gold. He doesn't welcome you. He glares, calculating. Jason bows, voice steady but not low, explaining. The quest, they seek the golden fleece, gift of Phrixus, and wish to earn it honorably. Eights laughs, a sound more like the bark of a predator than mirth. Yes, you may have it, he says, and the hall stirs. But he is not done. His eyes gleam as he sets forth impossible tasks. You must yoke fire-breathing bulls of bronze, plough a field, sow it with dragon's teeth, and fight the warriors who spring from the ground. Only then, if you live, may you claim the fleece. The court erupts with gasps. It's the kind of offer that is really a death sentence dressed up as generosity. Jason swallows. There is no choice. To refuse is to fail, and failure means exile, mockery, and probably Hera's wrath. He nods, as if this ordeal is perfectly reasonable, but the weight in his eyes tells you he knows he will not survive this without something more than mortal grit. That something enters the story with a soft step. Medea, daughter of Hades, priestess of Hecate, and perhaps the most dangerous woman you will ever meet. She listens as her father speaks, lips tightening, eyes darting toward Jason. Legends say Hera and Athena have already nudged Eros to strike her heart with a well-aimed arrow. You can believe it. She stares at Jason not as an enemy, but as a mystery she must solve. Later, in the hushed corridors of the palace, she finds him. Jason startles, perhaps bracing for betrayal, but Medea speaks low, voice threaded with urgency. She offers aid, a potion, a charm, a plan. She knows the bulls, the teeth, the earth that births warriors. She alone can tilt the odds. And yes, she admits though in whispers she has fallen for him. Whether by divine trick or her own restless spirit, her fate has tangled with his. Jason listens. Torn. To accept her help means risking entanglement with a woman whose power is both enchanting and terrifying. To refuse means almost certain death. He chooses survival and, perhaps, something more than survival. You see in his posture a flicker of relief, a surrender to forces larger than himself. That night, the Argonauts whisper about this development. Some mutter uneasily about trusting a sorceress. Others nudge each other, grinning at Jason's unexpected stroke of luck. Orpheus, plucking quietly at his lyre, sings of strange alliances, of love sprouting in hostile soil. The men listen, unsure whether to laugh or pray. Meanwhile, Medea prepares. She grinds herbs beneath the moon, chants to Hecate, and brews the ointment that will shield Jason from flame and steel. Her shadows stretch long in the torchlight, her figure moving with purpose. You realize she is the pivot on which the whole myth now turns. The fleece is guarded by monsters and magic, yes, but it is also guarded by a father. And the only key to that lock is his daughter. You, standing invisible in this myth, feel the unease that comes with bargains struck at midnight. Love, loyalty, and betrayal swirl together like storm clouds. Jason sleeps fitfully, clutching his faith in Medea like a talisman. The tasks await at dawn, and with them, the question that has lingered since the Argo first touched these waters. How much of victory is courage and how much is simply surrendering? To the right sorcery, the river murmurs outside the palace walls. The fleece glitters somewhere beyond, suspended in the dark woods, and Medea, unseen, smiles at her handiwork, weaving Jason's fate into her own. Dawn cracks pale and colorless over Colchis, and with it, the weight of Jason's trial settles heavier than his armor. The courtyard fills with murmuring Colchians, soldiers leaning on spears, nobles craning their necks for a better view. You can feel the anticipation. Everyone expects a swift, humiliating death. Jason, they think, is nothing more than a desperate foreigner about to become a footnote in their king's legend. The bulls arrive first. They thunder into the field with a metallic rumble, height gleaming like hammered bronze, nostrils snorting steam so hot it singes the grass. Flames spit from their mouths in bursts, the heat pulsing like bellows. Even from a safe distance, the air scorches your skin. The crowd gasps and laughs, already savoring the spectacle. Jason steps forward, armed with Medea's ointment smeared across his skin and shield. It glistens faintly, an invisible barrier against the inferno. He murmurs to himself, perhaps prayers, perhaps curses, then lunges toward the first bull. The beast charges, fire erupting, but the flames roll harmlessly over Jason's body. The ointment holds. You can almost hear the Colchians' confusion, their amusement curdling into disbelief. The trick is not only surviving, but controlling. Jason grips the horns, muscles straining, boots gouging furrows into the earth. The bull bellows, smoke pouring, but slowly inch by painful inch he forces its head down, wrestles it toward the yoke. The second bull arrives, equally furious, but the rhythm repeats, fire meets ointment. Strength meets will, and Jason clamps it under control. The yoke snaps into place, and suddenly the impossible task looks almost ordinary. The crowd erupts, half in horror, half in awe. Eight's smile flickers but the trial is far from over. Jason seizes the plow and drags it through the field, the bulls heaving forward, earth turning in thick furrows. Sweat streams down his temples, his lungs burn, yet he does not stop. Row after row, he lays open the soil until the ground looks scarred with neat trenches. Into these, he scatters the dragon's teeth, each one clattering like a small bone dot at first. Silence. Then the earth trembles. One by one, armored men claw their way up from the dirt, eyes hollow, mouths grim. These are the Spartoi, the sown men, born for war, bred from nothing but fang and fury. They rise in dozens, swords gleaming, shields rattling. The crowd roars approval. This, surely, will end the foreigner. Jason, of course, remembers Medea's advice. Do not meet them head-on. Do not try to fight an army born of soil. Instead, use their own frenzy against them. As the first warrior lunges, Jason hurls a stone not at the soldier, but into the midst of the growing horde. Immediately, confusion spreads. The Spartoi turn on one another, each convinced the blow came from a brother. Swords clash, spears thrust, armor splinters. In moments, the field becomes a storm of self-destructs. Jason steps back, conserving his strength, letting chaos thin their numbers. Still, not all fall. A few break through, lunging at him with brute force. Now Jason fights, shield ringing, blade flashing, every strike bolstered by Medea's magic. He moves not like a farmer's son, but like a man possessed, or perhaps carried by the inevitability of story itself. When at last the dust clears, only Jason stands upright, chest heaving, clothes scorched but body untouched. The Spartoi lie scattered, crumbled back into lifelessness. The silence that follows is thick, a collective pause before reality sinks in. Jason has done it. He has done what no mortal should ever have survived. Slowly, disbelievingly, applause ripples through the crowd, mixed with murmurs of fear. Eight's face hardens into stone. He does not clap. His plan to rid himself of this intruder has failed. Jason wipes the sweat from his brow, glancing up at Medea in the gallery. Her expression is unreadable, but her eyes gleam with satisfaction. She knows what her father knows. The fleece is no longer safe in Colchis. That evening, the Argonauts celebrate cautiously aboard the Argo. Cups clink, laughter rises, but there is tension under it all. They know eights cannot be trusted, that victory in the field does not equal triumph in the quest. Orpheus plays softly, the notes curling over the deck like a lullaby. The men fall asleep against the rails, but Jason lies awake, staring at the dark water. Some scholars claim the imagery of sowing dragons' teeth is a memory of ancient agricultural rituals, mythologized into battle. Others suggest it's a metaphor for civil strife warriors springing from the soil of one's own land. Historians still argue whether this tale reflects cultural anxieties about outsiders, proving superior to local kings. You, meanwhile, just recognize it as a story where surviving the impossible feels less like luck and more like being caught in the web of gods and witches. The fleece still hangs, hidden in a sacred grove, guarded by a dragon that never sleeps. Eights may have lost face, but he has not lost power. And Medea, restless under her father's roof, is already weaving her next move. You sense that Jason's trial was never the true test, it was merely the doorway into darker bargains. Yet to come. Night folds around Colchis like a heavy cloak, but sleep refuses to settle. The Argonauts lie restless on the deck, blades close at hand, their eyes darting to the tree line. They know Ates is plotting he cannot allow strangers to best him and walk away. You, listening to the creak of timbers and the lap of water, sense danger as surely as the men do. The air itself feels charged, waiting for betrayal to crackle dot in the palace. Medea paces her chamber. She has seen her father's fury, the way his fists clenched when Jason lived through the trials. She knows Ates will never surrender the fleece willingly. To him, the fleece is not merely treasure, it is proof of divine favor, the very emblem of his kingship. Losing it would make him vulnerable, even mortal. So Medea makes a decision. She will betray blood for desire, homeland for fate. At midnight, she steals from the palace. Cloak drawn low, torch hidden. Her steps are soundless on the garden paths. Guided by the moon and by her own determination, she finds Jason awake, leaning against the prow as if guarding the ship from shadows. Their eyes meet, and for a moment the world seems to hold its breath. Then she speaks, voice trembling yet resolute. If he still seeks the fleece, he must come with her tonight. There will be no official surrender, only theft. Jason hesitates. Only a moment long enough for you to wonder if he weighs the morality of it, but no. He knows this is the only way. He nods, calls quietly to a handful of Argonauts, and follows Medea into the night. The men exchange wary glances, some see salvation, others smell doom. But none dare refuse. The path winds into the sacred grove of ours where the fleece hangs. It glows faintly even before they reach it, golden strands shimmering through branches like captured sunlight. But between them and the prize coils the guardian, a dragon so massive its body loops around the trunk again and again, scales glittering like wet obsidian, eyes unblinking. It does not sleep. It never sleeps. Its hiss is a constant, low thunder that makes the ground tremble. Jason grips his sword, but Medea touches his arm sharply. Steel will not prevail here. She steps forward, chanting under her breath words older than kings. From her pouch she scatters herbs, powders, roots ground under moonlight. Smoke rises, thick and sweet, clinging to the dragon's nostrils. She sways like a dancer, eyes fixed on the beast, voice threading tighter and tighter until even you feel drowsy listening. Slowly, impossibly, the dragon's coils loosen. Its head droops, lids heavy, a shudder of resistance quivering through its body before surrendering. At last, the guardian sinks into slumber, a mountain of scale and fang defeated not by blade, but by spell. Jason wastes no time. He rushes to the fleece, seizing it with reverence and greed in equal measure. The fabric glows brighter now, alive with the blessing of the ram. Its surface warm under his fingers. He lifts it high, and for the first time since leaving Iolcus, triumph truly feels within reach. The men cheer, softly at first, then louder, their joy bubbling over. But Medea's face is shadowed. She knows this act severs her from her family forever. No sooner have they turned back than the alarm rises. Bells clang from the palace, dogs bark. Voices shout. Ates knows. The theft is not silent. The grove itself seems to scream as branches whip in the wind. The Argonauts race with Medea through the night, fleece gleaming like a beacon that betrays as much as it promises. By the time they reach the Argo, the river is alive with torches. The ship pushes off under frantic oars, the men straining, water spraying from every stroke. Jason wraps the fleece around the mast, its golden light flooding the deck. Behind them, horns blare or splash and Colchian ships give chase. Ates himself is said to roar commands from the shore, voice carrying like thunder. The hunt has begun. Historians still argue whether this theft reflects an ancient memory of cultic relics, stolen from foreign temples, a mythic echo of real looting. Others see it as symbolic, Greek heroes always winning by cunning and divine favor, never by simple might. Whatever its meaning, you cannot deny the drama. The fleece is theirs, but so is pursuit. On the Argo, Medea clings to Jason's arm, equal parts relief and terror. She has crossed the line of no return, chosen exile for a man she barely knows. Jason, for his part, stares at the glowing fleece as if hypnotized, perhaps blind to the cost. The men row harder, chanting, home, home, home. though home is leagues away and lined with enemies. The river widens into the sea, waves slapping the hull with urgency. Dawn bleeds over the horizon, and with it, a new chapter. Jason has the fleece. Yes, but Colchis has not yet finished with him. The golden prize shines against the dark waters, both blessing and curse. And you, swaying with the ship's rhythm, realize that winning the treasure is only half the myth. The escape and the price will be far darker. The Argo surges into open water, oars slicing like frantic wings, but Colchis is not done with you. Behind, the shouts fade, replaced by the rhythmic splash of enemy oars. Ates has unleashed his fleet, ships dark and heavy, hulls bristling with warriors. The chase is on, and the sea itself seems to thrill at the contest. You clutch the rail as the Argo bucks against the current. Every man bends to his oar, veins bulging, muscles taut. The rhythm so fierce you can almost hear bones creak. Orpheus does not play tonight. No music could suit men whose lives depend on each pull. Instead, the beat is set by survival itself. Medea stands near the mast, cloak whipping, eyes scanning the horizon. She knows her father, knows he will never relent while breath remains in him. And she knows something darker. Among the pursuers is her own brother, Apsyrtus, leading a detachment swift enough to outflank the Argonauts. His ship cuts across the waves like a spear, closing distance faster than the others. Panic rustles through the crew. If Apsyrtus catches them, escape is finished. Jason grips the fleece tighter, as though its glow could shield him. But the reality gnaws at everyone. Brute speed cannot save them. Something more desperate must be done. Medea steps forward, face pale, voice steady. She tells Jason she has a plan, but it requires betrayal deeper than theft. Her idea is horrifying in its simplicity. Lure Apsyrtus into a trap and kill him. Jason recoils at first. This is fratricide, kinslaying of the worst sort. But Medea argues with fire in her eyes. It is him or us. My father will not stop until his son avenges him. Only his death buys us freedom. The words chill the deck. You realize Medea has crossed even further into shadow love, and survival have made her ruthless. That night, under cover of starlight, the plan unfolds. Medea sends a message to Apsyrtus, promising to betray Jason and deliver the fleece if he meets her at a shrine on a lonely island. The brother, trusting his sister, comes ashore with only a small escort. He steps into the torchlight, confusion flickering when Medea greets him warmly. Then Jason strikes from the shadows. Some versions say Jason's sword ends it quickly. Others whisper Medea herself held the blade, luring him close before the fatal blow. Historians still argue whether the story softened Jason's guilt by shifting blame onto Medea. The outcome, however, is clear. Apsyrtus falls. His body lies crumpled, blood staining the sacred ground, and Medea averts her eyes, though it was her will that placed him there. Some accounts grow darker still, claiming she dismembered him, scattering the pieces into the sea to delay aids as he stopped to collect his son. Whether or not you believe this grisly detail, the myth insists that kinslaying becomes the stain Medea will never wash away. The Argonauts return to the ship silent, their triumph soured. Even the fleece seems dimmer, its glow uneasy, as though ashamed of the price paid. Orpheus strums a mournful chord, the notes wavering on the salt wind, but no one speaks. You feel it in your chest. Victory now tastes like iron. Still, the deed works. Ates halts when he learns his son is lost, grief twisting into fury, but the delay is enough. The Colchian fleet falters, their pursuit fractured. The Argo seizes the chance, catching favorable winds that hurl her far from Colchis' reach. Yet freedom does not come without weight. The men row with downcast eyes. Haunted by the shadow of what they have done. In later centuries, philosophers debated this moment. Was it justice, a necessary act in a brutal age? Or was it hubris, a curse that would hound Jason and Medea forever? You can almost hear them. Perhaps the gods demanded a price for the fleece, and the siblings' blood was that price. Scholars still argue whether the myth is a warning against trusting passion over law, or a grim acknowledgement that survival sometimes requires the unforgivable dot as dawn rises. The Argo glides into unfamiliar waters. The wind shifts, gentler now, carrying the smell of cedar and myrrh from distant coasts. But no scent, however sweet. can erase the memory of Absyrtus' eyes as he realized betrayal had come from his own blood. Jason sits apart, staring at the fleece draped over the mast. Its gold light flickers on his face, making him look half victor, half condemned. Medea watches him silently, unreadable. She has tied her fate to his so completely that she no longer considers turning back. Whatever lies ahead, monsters, storms, gods, they will face it together. Bound by both love and bloodshed. You, rocking with the ship's motion. Know the story will never recover its innocence. The quest has shifted, no longer merely a test of strength or wit, but a tale of guilt dragging behind them like a wake. The fleece is won, but the curse of kinslaying has been sown. And curses, as you've learned in these myths, always bloom sooner or later. You stand now in the shadow of the Caucasus, a land where jagged peaks slice into the sky and clouds cling like stubborn cobwebs. Your breath fogs in the thin air, and your legs ache from the endless climb. But Jason insists the golden fleece lies just beyond another ridge. You've heard that line before, usually right before your sandals give out. The mountains are said to be haunted by spirits of the restless dead, and honestly, if they're hanging around in this wind, they must be really committed to their grudges. You plod on, brushing snow from your face, and wonder if fleece or no fleece, your toes are doomed. The Argonauts set up camp in a narrow valley, where a stream tumbles down from icy slopes. Orpheus tries to keep Moran alive with his lyre, though the strings freeze stiff and sound more like a badly tuned radio. Hercules, if he were still here, might have shouldered the cold without complaint, but the group feels smaller without him, and every echo reminds you of the missing. Scholars still debate whether Jason's journey really crossed the Caucasus, or if poets simply borrowed its reputation for danger. Either way, your bones tell you it's believable. Morning arrives, grey and unwelcoming, and Jason points to a trail winding up a sheer rock face. You start to mutter objections, but he silences you with the promise of a shortcut. Halfway up, rocks crumble underfoot, tumbling into the abyss below. Medea, ever steady, chants soft words that seem to settle the stones. She claims spirits obey her, though whether it's sorcery or just the sound of confidence, you're too busy clinging to the cliff to argue. The air smells faintly of sulfur, like a giant match has been struck, and you wonder if Prometheus's old punishment fires still smolder nearby. By dusk, the path delivers you to a plateau where ruins of an ancient shrine cling to the edge. Columns lean precariously, carved with images of winged lions and forgotten kings. A few of the crew whisper that it's a temple of the sky gods, built by travelers who never came back. Archaeologists in the modern age sometimes find such shrines. High in the Caucasus, markers of cultures lost to time. Nobody can agree whether they were sanctuaries for trade or simply desperate outposts against the weather. Either way, you feel the weight of ghosts pressing in. Jason insists on camping in the ruins, declaring that the gods will shield them. You, less certain, curl into your cloak and listen to the mountain winds whistle through hollow pillars. The sound is oddly musical, like a chorus of pipes, and though eerie, it lulls you toward drowsiness. When you stir awake in the middle of the night, Medea is awake, too, her face lit by embers as she whispers over herbs that smoke blue in the fire. She notices your gaze and gives the tiniest smile, as though assuring you that the mountain itself is listening. You're not sure that's comforting. The next morning, they find claw marks gouged deep into the stone floor of the temple. Too wide for any wolf, too sharp for any bear, they shimmer faintly in the dawn light. One sailor suggests they're griffin scratches, guardians of buried gold. Another argues they're just weather-worn cracks. Historians still argue whether griffins ever existed as anything more than symbolic hybrids, carved on shields and pottery, but the crew isn't in the mood for academic debate. They pack up quickly, shoulders hunched against unseen watchers. By midday, a blizzard swallows the peaks. Snow lashes sideways, visibility shrinks to a few feet, and you shuffle forward blindly, trusting Jason's silhouette like a fragile rope. Your hands go numb despite wrapping them in spare cloth, and you can't feel the slope beneath your sandals. Then, out of the white, a flicker of gold appears. Not the fleece, but something stranger, shards of sunlight glinting off crystal embedded in the mountainside. Ancient travelers once chipped such veins, convinced they were divine signs. You almost reach to touch it, but Medea pulls you onward. Muttering that some laws are meant only to distract, the storm finally breaks as night descends, and you stumble into a sheltered cave. Inside, paintings adorn the walls, deer leaping, hunters with bows, spiral patterns no one can interpret. Archaeologists would later date such markings back thousands of years, testaments to early life here. The Argonauts, however, read them differently as omens pointing the way to the fleece. You lie back on the stone floor, exhausted, and think that maybe the old hunters just wanted to doodle where they wouldn't be rained on. Sleep creeps over you, but the cave keeps whispering drips of water, shifts of stone, and a faint rustling as if the walls breathe. You're not sure whether you drift into dreams or simply into the mountain's memory, but the fleece feels closer, glimmering in the dark like a promise you can almost reach. You leave the Caucasus behind with relief, descending from the blinding snowfields into gentler slopes where the air grows warmer, and the wind smells faintly of pine and smoke. It's the kind of terrain where you expect to see villagers tending goats or roasting chestnuts, but instead you find another riddle waiting, the so-called bronze giant of Crete. Well, maybe not waiting, exactly more like stomping around the coastline with the casual menace of someone who doesn't need to worry about stub toes. Talos, they call him guardian of the island, a massive figure made of gleaming bronze that creaks like an overworked windmill each time he moves. You squint from the deck of the Argo, and for a moment, you wonder if it's just the sun bouncing off a cliffside statue. But then it lumbers, raising a tree trunk arm, and you feel your stomach drop. Jason gathers the Argonauts, their faces pale. The sea is calm, deceptively so, and yet one misplaced shove from Talos would splinter the ship like a toy. Some accounts claim he circled the island 3 times a day, like a patrol on an endless loop. Historians still argue whether the myth was born from sailors glimpsing giant bronze statues from afar, or from tales of primitive automata-mechanical guardians powered by hidden technology. You can almost picture ancient engineers tinkering with gears and levers, proud of their oversized security guard. Either way, the Argonauts don't care about debates. They just want to survive the encounter. Talos stands at the water's edge now, hurling boulders the size of chariots. They splash into the waves around the Argo, sending plumes of seawater cascading over the deck. One sailor jokes weakly that it's just Talos's way of skipping stones, but nobody laughs. The crew rows furiously, muscles straining, while Jason shouts for speed. Medea, calm as ever, steps to the prow. Her eyes glint in the fading light, and her voice carries even above the crash of waves. She doesn't shout. She whispers. She speaks to the air, to the metal, to the thing itself. You've seen her mutter before over herbs and fires, but now it feels larger, a direct line to the pulse of the island. Talos pauses, tilting his head as if trying to listen. For the first time, you notice something odd, a faint seam at the back of his ankle, where greenish liquid seems to ooze. Ancient accounts say Talos wasn't invincible at all. He had a single vein, running from his neck to his heel, sealed by a bronze nail. Remove the plug and the ichor, the divine lifeblood would drain away. Medea gestures, weaving her hands like she's untangling threads. The giant shudders, takes one lurching step forward, and then, with a groan that rattles your bones, stumbles. His heel strikes a jagged rock, and the bronze nail dislodges. Golden fluid spurts like a broken winter skin. You watch in disbelief as the great guardian falters, his knees buckling, his colossal body collapsing against the shore. The sound is like thunder echoing down the coastline. The crew cheers, though it's a shaky sound, half relief, half awe. Jason pats Medea's shoulder, clearly both grateful and unnerved. Some say she used sorcery to bewitch Talos. Others claim she tricked him into stumbling. Historians still argue whether the myth reflects early fascination with robotics, or simply a symbolic warning about overconfidence. For you, though, it's simpler. You just survived getting squashed by a metal foot. As the Argonauts row into calmer waters, the sun dips into the horizon. The island glows orange, and the waves turn glassy, reflecting stars as they begin to prick the sky. The men relax, some even laughing nervously, retelling the moment they saw a bronze titan topple. You sit quietly, still tasting salt on your lips, still hearing the groan of the giant in your ears. Later that night, anchored offshore, the crew feasts on roasted fish and figs. They pass around skins of wine, though most are too tired to drink much. Orpheus plays a gentle tune, his lyre restored now that the chill of the Caucasus is behind you. The song drifts over the water, soft and almost mournful. As though paying respects to the fallen tallows, you lean back, gazing at the constellations. There's comfort in their permanence, even when the ground and sea below keep shifting. And just before sleep claims you, you hear Medea again, murmuring to herself. You catch a few words, something about iron, veins, and the power hidden in weakness. You wonder if she's reflecting on the giant, or on Jason, or perhaps on you, stumbling through this endless journey. Either way, you close your eyes, grateful that tonight, at least, you're safe from trampling feet. The morning after Talos's fall is strangely quiet. The sea rolls gently, as if the gods are giving the Argo a moment of calm before the next trial. You rise with stiff shoulders, salt still clinging to your skin, and stretch while the crew readies the oars. The island of Crete fades into the haze behind you, leaving only the memory of bronze creaks and crashing metal. Ahead, Jason insists, lies the strait that will test your nerves more than any giant ever could, the clash of the simple gades, the clashing rocks. You've heard sailors whisper about them since the start of the voyage. To towering cliffs, said to smash together whenever a ship dares to pass between. Imagine a cosmic nutcracker, except instead of nuts. It enjoys reducing ships and everyone on board into driftwood. You squint at the horizon and, sure enough, two jagged silhouettes loom there. Their tips fog-shrouded, their bases churning with white water. Jason gathers the Argonauts on deck, his tone unusually grim. He reminds everyone of the oracle's advice, to release a dove first and watch whether it escapes. If the bird passes through alive, the crew must row with all their might immediately afterward. If not, well, it's been nice knowing each other. Some historians still argue whether the tale of the Symplegades was inspired by volcanic islands in constant motion, or if it was a poetic metaphor for the Bosphorus Strait's deadly currents. Either way, staring at the cliffs now, you'd rather not test the theory. The dove is released, its wings flashing white against the grey sky. Time seems to hold its breath. The bird flits between the rocks just as they lurch inward with a crash that makes your teeth ache. For a heartbeat you're sure the dove is gone, but then you see it burst out the other side, minus a few tail feathers, alive and flapping desperately. The crew cheers short-lived, because now it's your turn. Jason barks orders, and the men throw themselves into the oars. The wood groans, the muscles of 50 men burn, and you add your own desperate strength, feeling your shoulders scream. The sea churns, waves slapping the hull as if the rocks themselves are stirring the water into chaos. The cliffs begin to move, slowly grinding toward each other. The sound is unbearable, a mix of stone grinding and thunder. You row harder, knuckles white on the handle. Spray blinds you, and your chest feels like it will burst. Orpheus tries to keep rhythm with his lyre, but the clash of water drowns him out. Ahead, Jason stands at the prow, shouting encouragement, though his voice cracks with strain. You don't dare look up, don't dare imagine the cliffs closing. You focus only on the next pull, the next heave. The Argo shoots forward, waves roaring louder, until you feel the shadow of the cliffs overhead. The rocks close with terrifying speed, and for a moment you're sure it's too late. Then impact, not against the ship, but just behind it. The cliffs crash together with such force the deck trembles. A huge wave shoves the Argo forward, and suddenly you're free, out into open water. The cliffs shrinking behind you. Silence falls, broken only by the heavy panting of exhausted rowers. You look back, expecting to see the cliffs reset, ready to crush the next foolhardy sailor. But instead, the rocks remain fixed, frozen forever. Some versions of the myth say the Argo was destined to be the last ship to pass, and the gods stilled the rocks as a gift to Jason. Historians still debate whether this last ship detail was a literary invention, to give the tale finality. Regardless, you're just glad the cliffs aren't going to try a round two. The crew collapses where they sit, sweating and gasping, but laughter begins to ripple among them. Even the gruffest oarsmen can't resist grinning. You've survived bronze giants and clashing cliffs, and somehow you're still afloat. Jason thanks the guards with a small offering, pouring wine over the side. You join the others in the toast, though part of you suspects Medea's quiet presence did more to get you through than divine mercy. That night, anchored in calm waters, the mood is lighter than it's been in weeks. Fires flicker on deck, roasting fish caught fresh from the strait, and the men sing. Voices hoarse but joyful. Orpheus plucks a gentle accompaniment, and for once, the music isn't drowned out by storms or stones. You find yourself staring at the stars reflected in the water, thinking of the dove, small and fragile, darting through impossible danger. You feel a bit like that dove, now ruffled, missing some feathers, but alive. As you drift towards sleep, you imagine those cliffs grinding in your dreams, their sound echoing like distant drums. Yet you know you'll wake in the morning to clear seas, and that thought wraps around you like a warm cloak. You survive the simple gates. Somehow, against all odds, you're still moving forward. The sea grows quieter after the simple gates, as though the gods have finally granted the Argonauts a reprieve. The waters widen, currents slow, and the horizon spreads open like an endless ribbon of blue silk. You sit on the deck, legs stretched out, watching gulls wheel overhead. Their calls sound almost playful, a relief compared to the shrieks of storms and crashing stone. But of course, peace never lasts long in these myths. Soon, new shapes rise out of the mist-low islands, rocky and uneven, and your stomach twists with dread when Jason mutters their name, the Stymphalian Islands. You remember the stories. Birds that aren't birds, at least not the kind you'd like to feed breadcrumbs in a park. These are monstrous creatures with bronze feathers that they can shoot like arrows, their wings cutting the air with a metallic hiss. They swarm in flocks so dense they blot out the sun. Hercules once dealt with their cousins on the mainland, but he's long gone from your crew. And now, as you approach the islands, the air itself begins to vibrate with the ominous beat of countless wings. The first screech cuts through the stillness like a blade. You tilt your head up and see them, dark shapes spiraling high above, hundreds of them, their feathers catching sunlight like shards of metal. It's beautiful in the way lightning is beautiful impressive, but you'd rather not stand directly under it. Jason orders shields raised, but even he looks uncertain. Orpheus, ever the musician, lifts his lyre. You raise an eyebrow against birds armed with bronze, but he strums and the notes spill out sweet, clear, and strangely commanding. The effect is immediate. The flock shifts, circling lower, wings no longer frantic, but almost synchronized, as if the rhythm has caught their instincts. You've seen Orpheus calm tempests and soothe angry hearts, but seeing him tame a swarm of razor-feathered predators feels like a magic trick beyond reason. Still, not every bird is swayed. A few dive, shrieking, their feathers slicing through the air. One clangs off a shield and embeds itself in the mast with a metallic thunk. You duck instinctively, heart pounding. The Argonauts raise their spears, but Jason signals restraint too many to fight head-on. Instead, the crew beats their shields with swords, adding a harsh percussion beneath Orpheus's melody. The combined din rises over the water, a chaotic orchestra of metal and music. The birds falter, confused. Orpheus's tune grows louder, richer, pulling them away. Slowly, the great flock drifts toward the far horizon, the sound of their wings fading like receding thunder. A few stragglers remain, glaring with beady eyes, but eventually they, too, vanish. The sky clears, blue and empty, and you exhale for what feels like the first time in hours. Later, anchored near one of the smaller islands, you explore a shore littered with strange remnants, feathers hardened like bronze darts, bones of animals and perhaps men who strayed too close. The air smells faintly of iron. Some sailors pocket feathers as trophies, though you can't help thinking they're cursed. Historians still argue whether the myth of the Stymphalian birds came from real encounters with aggressive phlox ibises, cranes, or even pelicans that gathered in terrifying numbers. Others suggest volcanic vents may have inspired the image of deadly metallic feathers falling from the sky. The truth, like so many myths, is probably tangled somewhere in between. The crew relaxes on a fire that night, cooking fish and talking about the day's survival as if it were a performance. Remember when the feather nearly took off your ear? One laughs, nudging his friend. Another brags about deflecting to in midair, though you're fairly certain he was cowering behind a barrel. Jason smiles but says little, his gaze distant. Perhaps he's already thinking ahead about the fleece waiting in Colchis, or about the next danger lurking just beyond sight. You curl into your cloak and close your eyes, lulled by the sound of gentle waves. But in your dreams, wings still beat overhead, metallic and merciless. You wake once in the middle of the night, and the fire has burned low. The sea is calm, the stars unblinking, and Orpheus hums quietly as if weaving a protective lullaby over the crew. It reassures you, and you drift back to sleep, trusting his music more than any shield. Morning dawns with a blush of pale gold over the horizon, and Jason announces that the Argo must press onward. The promise of the fleece feels closer now, almost tangible, like a light glimmering just out of reach. The crew rows steadily, their movements more confident after surviving bronze giants, clashing cliffs and metallic birds. You sit at the stern, watching the coastline stretch into a jagged mosaic of bays and headlands, and you can't help but feel the world itself is stretching, too, testing how far you're willing to go dock by midday. A new sound greets your ears, not the rustle of wings or crash of waves, but a deep, continuous roar. At first you mistake it for thunder, but the sky is cloudless. Then you see it, a narrow channel between towering cliffs where water churns in a violent cauldron. Spray leaps high, and the sea itself seems to rise and fall like a chest breathing to fast. Jason points grimly. This is the Strait of Scylla and Charybdis. You've heard whispers about these monsters since the voyage began. Scylla, with her 6 terrible heads, each snapping and snarling with hunger. Charybdis, a moor in the sea itself, swallowing water and spewing it back out, creating whirlpools that drag ships to their doom. You can't see Scylla now perhaps lurking in caves, but Charybdis is unmistakable. A vortex swirls ahead, wide enough to gulp the Argo in a heartbeat. The roar deepens, a watery growl that rattles your ribs. Jason steadies himself at the prow. His plan is simple in theory and terrifying in practice. Hug close to Scylla's cliffs to avoid Charybdis's pull, but row fast enough to avoid becoming Scylla's dinner. Simple, he says, as though ordering bread at a market stall. You grip the rail, wondering if this counts as a diet plan, being too terrified to eat for the rest of your life. The crew rows with fierce determination, oars biting into the current. The cliffs loom close, so close you could almost reach out and touch the barnacle-crusted stone. Shadows deepen, and suddenly, from the dark crevices, Scylla lunges. 6 long necks whip out, each ending in a snarling dog-like head, teeth snapping at the air. One head lunges for a sailor, but he ducks in time, the jaws clamping down on empty space. Another head grazes the deck, leaving gouges in the wood. Panic ripples through the Argonauts. They jab with spears, swing with swords, but Scylla's heads retreat and strike again with horrifying speed. The air reeks of brine and rot, as if her breath carries the memory of countless devoured sailors. You huddle lower, clutching your cloak, while Jason shouts encouragement, his voice almost drowned by the cacophony of roaring water and screeching heads. And then Charybdis bellows. The vortex expands, sucking at the sea with terrifying force. The Argo tilts, pulled sideways toward the whirlpool's gaping maw. You feel your stomach lurch as the deck tips, the oars straining against the unnatural current. For a moment, you're sure the ship will be swallowed whole. The men scream, clinging to ropes and each other. But then, Orpheus strikes up a frantic melody on his lyre, not calm this time, but sharp, urgent, driving the rhythm of the oars. The men respond instinctively, rowing in time to the beat, fighting both whirlpool and monster. You feel the Argo surge forward, each stroke pulling you inches away from doom. Scylla shrieks in frustration, her head snapping one last time before retreating into the shadows. Behind you, the whirlpool collapses with a deafening roar, sending up a geyser of spray that drenches the deck. Somehow, impossibly, you're through. The sea opens again into calm, the cliffs falling away behind you. The men slump over their oars, gasping and trembling but alive. Jason gives thanks to the gods, pouring wine into the sea. though you suspect Orpheus's music once again tipped the balance later. Anchored in a sheltered cove, the crew sits in stunned silence. Nobody brags this time, not even the loudest sailors. The memory of those snapping jaws and that yawning vortex is too fresh. Instead, they sit quietly, passing bread and figs, chewing slowly as though savoring life itself. Historians still argue whether Scylla and Charybdis were inspired by natural hazards, perhaps reefs, and whirlpools in the Strait of Messina, or whether they were purely mythological. But sitting there, wrapped in a damp cloak, you don't care. All you know is that you looked into the abyss and survived. That night, as stars prick the velvet sky, you find yourself staring at the water, half expecting Scylla's heads to rise again. Instead, the sea only sighs as though relieved to let you pass. Sleep creeps over you gently, like a tide, and for the first time in days, you don't dream of teeth or whirlpools, only of open horizons. The voyage drifts into a gentler rhythm after Scylla and Charybdis, almost as though the gods themselves need a breather. The Argo glides across calmer waters, the oars dipping in steady, unhurried strokes. You lean on the rail, letting the salty breeze dry your hair and soothe the sting of sea spray on your face. It almost feels like a vacation cruise if cruises included near-death experiences, with six-headed monsters and bottomless whirlpools. But peace never lasts. By late afternoon, the air grows oddly still, heavy with a sweetness you can't quite place. The sea darkens, reflecting clouds that seem to bloom out of nowhere. Jason narrows his eyes. The sirens, he mutters, and the words fall like lead among the crew. You've heard the warnings. The sirens sing with voices so enchanting that sailors forget themselves, steering their ships straight onto jagged rocks. Their songs promise whatever you most desire: love, glory, comfort, but the result is always the same: shattered ships and bones bleaching in the sun. Scholars still debate whether the sirens were meant to symbolize dangerous coastlines, deceptive women, or simply the hazards of daydreaming at sea. Either way, you'd rather not become part of their archaeological record. The first note drifts across the water, so faint you almost mistake it for Orpheus tuning his lyre. But it grows richer, more human, a voice that feels like it's speaking directly into your chest. Another joins it, and another, weaving together in harmonies so beautiful your eyes sting with tears. The sound doesn't just reach your ears. It seems to unfurl inside your mind, filling spaces you didn't even know were empty. The sailors falter, they're all slowing. One drops his grip entirely, staring at the horizon with a blissful smile. Another stands, swaying, as though ready to leap into the sea. Even Jason's face softens, caught in the golden haze of the song. You feel it to the ache, the longing, the sudden belief that if you could just hear more, if you could just swim a little closer, everything would finally make sense. But then Orpheus strums his lyre, loud and deliberate. The sound cuts like sunlight through fog. His melody is bright, urgent, a living counterpoint to the siren's call. You cling to it like a rope, forcing your eyes to the deck, to the wood beneath your hands, to the rhythm that keeps your heart tethered. Slowly, painfully, the haze begins to lift. The men blink, shaking their heads, and grip their oars again. Still, the sirens sing. You can almost see them now, figures on the rocks, half hidden in mist, their shapes shifting between women and birds. Their voices rise higher, desperate, as Orpheus's music grows stronger. The jewel of songs fills the air, pulling at you from both sides, until you feel your skull might split. But Orpheus doesn't falter. His fingers fly across the strings, weaving a melody so fierce it leaves no room for deception. At last, the sirens' voices falter. Their song twists into something sharper, edged with frustration, before breaking apart into silence. The mist thins and the rocks recede into the distance, leaving only the steady rhythm of Orpheus's lyre. You slump against the rail, drenched in sweat though the air is cool. The crew sits in stunned quiet, eyes wide as if waking from a dream. Jason thanks Orpheus, his voice low, almost reverent. One sailor admits he nearly leapt overboard because he swore he saw his dead brother calling him. Another claims he saw fields of gold, endless wealth waiting on the shore. You don't share what you heard, it feels too personal. To Robert, the memory clings like seawater in your clothes. Historians still argue whether the sirens were originally imagined as bird-like beings, or as beautiful women, their forms shifting with each retelling. Some even suggest the myth arose from coastal winds that produced eerie whistling sounds. Whatever the explanation, you're grateful for Orpheus's counter-song. Without it, you'd likely be another skeleton among the rocks. That evening, anchored in a sheltered bay, Orpheus plays again, not to fight magic this time, but to soothe weary minds. His song is simple, a lullaby, and the crew listens in silence. The stars spread overhead, countless and steady. They glow far less deceptive than the siren's false promises. You wrap yourself in your cloak, shivering slightly, and let the music wash over you. For the first time in a while, you're grateful for something as mundane as exhaustion. Your eyelids grow heavy, and before long, you drift into sleep. The echoes of both songs tangled in your dreams, one dangerous, one saving. Both unforgettable. Morning returns as if the night before had never happened, though you can still feel the ghost of the siren's voices humming faintly. At the edges of your memory, the sea is calm, the sun stretches across the water, and the men of the Argo row with renewed purpose. They laugh a little louder than usual, perhaps to prove they are no longer spellbound, though every so often someone glances nervously back toward the horizon where the sirens had sung. You do too, but the rocks are long gone, hidden beneath distance and waves. Jason announces the next challenge lies ahead, the island of Thrinacia, sacred to the sun god Helios. He warns the men that they must not, under any circumstance, harm the cattle that graze there. You recall tales of Odysseus's crew centuries later, how they, too, would face temptation on these very pastures. The gods recycle their lessons, it seems, testing mortals with the same traps again and again. The Argo approaches the island, and you can already see the herds, sleek, shining cattle, their hides glowing faintly as though dipped in sunlight. Even from a distance, they look too perfect to be ordinary animals. Their movements are slow, deliberate, and strangely regal, as though they know they are divine. The sailors mutter among themselves, hungry after days of salted fish and stale bread. Meat that fresh and fat will be a banquet. Jason forbids it, reminding them of the dire warnings. To harm the cattle is to offend Helios directly, and no mortal can survive his wrath. Reluctantly, the crew agrees. Still, their eyes linger on the beasts grazing near the shore. You feel the pull to not of hunger, but of curiosity. These animals shimmer in a way that no ordinary herd ever could. To touch one would be to touch a piece of the sun itself. The day passes in uneasy restraint. You set up camp, cook bland rations, and try not to notice the way the smell of grass and cattle wafts toward you on the wind. The men shift restlessly, and one ought to begin whispering about how surely just one animal wouldn't be missed. Jason keeps close watch, his hand never far from his sword. By nightfall, clouds gather overhead, thick and grey. A storm begins to build, as though Helios himself suspects temptation will soon prove too strong. The wind howls through the camp, and the men huddle near their fires, when a bolt of lightning splits the sky, illuminating the island in stark white light. The cattle lift their heads in unison. For an instant, their eyes blaze like burning coals. The men recoil, and even Jason looks shaken. The storm rages all night, but come morning, the herds are still grazing peacefully, as though nothing had happened. Jason interprets it as a final warning and orders the crew back to the ship. They obey, though more than one glances back longingly. As the Argo pulls away from the island, the cattle turn as one, following the ship with steady, glowing eyes. You shiver and look away. The sea grows treacherous after Thrinacia. Waves rise higher, winds whip harder, and the Argo groans under the strain. The men fight to keep the ship steady, drenched and exhausted, their hands blistered from the oars. You grip the railing until your knuckles ache, praying silently that the ship will hold together. The storm feels less like chance and more like punishment, though for what? You hadn't harmed the cattle. Perhaps the gods are simply reminding you that obedience does not guarantee safety. Days blur into nights, and the storm shows no sign of ending. Food runs low, spirits sink, and even Jason looks weary. At last, the clouds begin to break, but the sea is still wild, and the Argo is driven far off course. When the coastline finally comes into view, it is not a friendly one. Jagged cliffs rise straight from the waves, their surfaces slick with spray. The men groan, too tired to face yet another peril, but Jason urges them on somehow. The Argo scrapes past the cliffs, battered but intact, and the waters gradually calm. The men collapse on the deck, too exhausted to cheer. You lie on your back, staring up at the sky, and wonder whether the gods are testing your endurance or simply amusing themselves at your expense. The stars twinkle indifferently. That night, Jason calls a quiet council. We have survived Scylla, Charybdis, and the Sirens. We have resisted Helios's cattle, but the journey is not yet done. Colchis is still far, and the fates may yet spin more trials into our thread. His words are sober, but they carry a certain pride too. Against odds that would have broken lesser crews, you are still afloat. The men sleep soundly, lulled by the gentle rocking of the ship. You remain awake, listening to the creak of wood, the sigh of ropes, the faint lapping of waves. The sea, when calm, can almost fool you into believing it is a friend. You know better, but you let yourself drift into that illusion anyway. Sleep comes quietly, as it always does when weariness outweighs fear. And somewhere, beyond the horizon, another challenge waits. The dawn is a pale smear across the horizon, and you rub sleep from your eyes as the Argo glides into gentler waters. The storm has passed, leaving behind air that smells clean and sharp, almost metallic. The crew stretches sore muscles, grateful for the lull. You think maybe, just maybe, the worst is behind you. Of course, you've thought that before, and the gods have a habit of laughing at such confidence. Jason points to a speck of land ahead, green and unassuming. It's the island of Ea, home of the sorcerer Cis, yes. That Cis, the same one Odysseus would later meet. Who turned men into pigs as easily as you microwave leftovers? The Argonauts, knowing their luck, brace for mischief. You dock at the island and follow Jason inland. The air is thick with the scent of herbs, sweet, bitter, intoxicating. Circe's dwelling is not ground but feels charged with an invisible energy, like static before lightning. She greets you with a smile that is equal parts welcome and warning. Her hair seems to shimmer between gold and bronze depending on how the light catches, and her eyes pierce straight through you. As though reading your most embarrassing secrets, Jason bows respectfully and asks for purification. He explains, somewhat sheepishly, that the crew has shed blood, an understatement given Medea's handiwork back in Colchis. Circe listens without judgment, though you notice her lips twitch slightly when Medea's name is spoken. They are kin, after all, both granddaughters of Helios. Family drama among gods and demigods makes your last awkward holiday dinner look tame. The purification ritual begins. Circe leads Jason to a hearth where she sprinkles barley and pours out a libation of honeyed wine. She chants words older than cities, words that seem to thrum inside your chest. Jason kneels, his expression solemn, and for a moment the room glows faintly, as if cleansed of invisible stains. The others follow, each receiving the same ritual. Even you feel lighter afterward, as though some guilt you hadn't named has been quietly lifted. Still, Circe does not release you without conditions. She warns Jason that their journey home will not be straightforward. The gods watch you, she says, her tone neither kind nor cruel. Hera shields you, but not even she can alter every thread spun by the fates. Her words linger like the smell of smoke in your clothes, impossible to shake off. Medea stands silently through it all, her face unreadable. You can't tell if she's comforted by her aunt's presence or unsettled by it. Circe notices, though, and her eyes soften for just a heartbeat before she returns to her sorcerer's composure. Historians still argue whether this meeting was truly amicable, or whether Circe subtly cursed the Argo before sending it away. You'll never know, but you file the unease away in the back of your mind. When you leave here, the men are quiet. They row in steady rhythm, as if afraid to break the fragile calm Circe has given them. The sea mirrors the sky, flat and glassy, so clear it reflects the ship like a second Argo beneath the water. It's beautiful, but unnerving to you half expect a mirror crew to reach up and drag you down. The calm doesn't last. Soon, black sails appear on the horizon. A fleet of Colchian ships, sent by Ates, closes in. The king has not forgiven the theft of his golden fleece, nor the betrayal by his daughter. Jason rallies the crew, but their faces are pale. They've survived monsters and storms, but human pursuers bring a different dread. Medea whispers urgently to Jason, her eyes wide. She knows her father's anger, knows the lengths he will go to reclaim her. "We must act quickly," she says. Her voice trembles, though whether from fear or calculation, you can't tell. She proposes a desperate bargain to draw her brother Apsyrtus into a trap. The name alone sends a shiver through the crew. Blood ties are about to be tested in the harshest way. You dock at a small island, pretending to parley. Apsyrtus arrives, trusting the promise of peace, and for a moment, you almost believe reconciliation is possible. The air is heavy with tension, the sound of cicadas buzzing in the trees like a warning drumbeat. Then Medea signals. The ambush is swift. Jason strikes and Apsyrtus falls. Silence follows, thick and suffocating. The crew shifts uncomfortably, aware that what just happened was not a heroic battle, but an execution. The gods, you suspect, will not look kindly on this choice. You can almost hear Nemesis, goddess of retribution, taking notes. Medea stands rigid, her face pale. She does not weep, but her eyes are hollow, as if some essential part of her has just shattered. You want to comfort her, but you also fear her the calm efficiency with which she has just sacrificed her brother for survival. Some myths say Jason committed the act. Others insist Medea wielded the blade. Either way, historians still argue whether she was the mastermind or merely the scapegoat. The Colchians scatter in shock, their leader slain, and the Argo escapes once more. But the victory feels poisoned. Even Jason looks grim, his knuckles white around his sword. He knows this stain will follow them. The crew rows in silence, no jokes, no songs, just the steady splash of oars. That night, you lie awake on the deck, staring at the stars. You wonder if you'll ever shake the image of Apsyrtus collapsing, his body crumpling into the sand. The sea laps gently against the hull, indifferent as ever. You whisper a small prayer that this choice does not doom you all. But the gods are not in the business of comforting mortals. They prefer to keep their plans cryptic. The Argo sails on, bearing not only men and a fleece, but now the weight of blood guilt. The morning after Apsyrtus' death arrives with a fog. So thick it feels like the world itself wants to hide from what you've done. The crew rows in near silence, the water whispering under the oars, each man lost in his own uneasy thoughts. Even Jason, usually steadfast, looks heavier somehow, as if guilt has wrapped itself around his shoulders. You imagine the gods watching from above, shaking their heads in that vague, parental disappointment that hurts worse than outright punishment. The Argo drifts into calmer seas, but no one feels relief. The men exchange glances that say more than words. We have crossed a line. You keep thinking back to Circe's warning how not even Hera could shield you from every twist of fate. It's almost neat, isn't it? One bloodstain traded for another, a purification immediately undone. And then, as if on cue, you find yourselves back at Circe's island. The ship touches shore with a groan, and Circe herself emerges, her gaze colder this time. She already knows. Sorceresses always know. Medea lowers her eyes, but Circe does not scold her. Instead, she performs another ritual of cleansing, this one sharper, as though she's scrubbing at something stubborn that refuses to come clean. You have angered the gods, she warns softly. Without reconciliation, no safe harbor will ever be yours. The ritual soothes the surface tension, but beneath it, you sense no true forgiveness. The crew files back onto the Argo, not quite daring to meet Medea's eyes. You wonder if some of them fear her now more than they fear storms or monsters. She has crossed her own bloodline for survival. What won't she do? Days turn into weeks, and the Argo glides into Ionian waters. The sea sparkles blue and deceptively innocent. But Hera's presence hovers over you like a protective cloak. You begin to notice small signs of her hand winds shifting at just the right time. Storms breaking before they strike. The crew whispers about her favor, though no one dares say it too loudly. Still, Hera's involvement draws in other gods, and not always friendly ones. At one point, the Argo drifts near the lands of the Phaeacians, where King Alcinous rules. If the name rings a bell, it's because Odysseus will later wash up here too. You half expect to see his ghost stumbling on the beach, muttering about Ithaca. Jason approaches the king for aid, but Alcinous hesitates. The Colchians are still in pursuit, demanding Medea's return. It becomes a political chess game, one where Medea's future is the piece being moved. Queen Erid, Alcinous's wife, listens more kindly. She takes Medea aside, speaks softly, and reminds her that sometimes survival is not about battle, but about legal binding. The solution is almost laughably domestic. After all your trials, Jason and Medea must marry. So, in the halls of the Phaeacians, the wedding happens. It is not grand, not dripping with garlands or golden goblets, but it is binding. You watch as Medea and Jason stand side by side, their hands joined, and for a moment you sense something tender beneath all the blood and prophecy. Still, you also sense the trap closing. A vow is not just a promise here, it's a chain forged by gods. Historians still argue whether this marriage was romantic, strategic, or coerced by necessity. You sit there, chewing stale bread, and think it's probably all three. Medea's face glows with both triumph and uncertainty. Jason's eyes dart between her and the fleece, as though weighing which one is heavier in his fate. The Colchians, upon hearing of the marriage, cannot reclaim Medea without breaking sacred law. They retreat reluctantly, cursing Jason's name and vowing vengeance. For now, the Argo is free. The men breathe easier, and songs tentatively return to the deck. You hum along, though your voice feels thin. The memory of Apsyrtus' blood is not erased, merely painted over with celebration. Sailing resumes. But it is not smooth. The gods still loom, and their moods remain unpredictable. At one point, you encounter Bronze Talos, the giant automaton guarding Crete. He strides along the shore, his massive form glittering like a living statue, hurling stones at the Argo to keep you from landing. His single vein of molten ichor glows like fire trapped under glass. The crew panics, but Medea steps forward, chanting spells with terrifying calm. She promises the giant sleep, whispers words that worm their way into his bronze skull. And with a final cry, Talos collapses. The earth shakes as he falls, the sound echoing across the island like thunder. Another impossible foe overcome, though again, it is Medea who tips the scale, not Jason. You can't help but notice the imbalance. Whose story is this, really? With Talos defeated, the Argo secures water and supplies, then sails onward. The men, buoyed by this victory, laugh and joke again, their earlier silence dissolving into camaraderie. Jason plays along, but you can see the tension in his smile. He must feel the shadow of what's coming, the reckoning waiting once you finally reach Iolcus. For now, though, you float under a sky dusted with stars. The sea is calm, the breeze gentle. You lie back on the deck, listening to the creak of ropes and the occasional snore of your shipmates. In moments like this, it's almost possible to forget the weight of prophecy, the wrath of gods, the stains of betrayal. Almost. But the horizon never forgets. It waits, patient and sharp, holding whatever comes next. The sea carries you onward, and at last the familiar coastline of Greece begins to take shape out of the haze. The men stir with excitement. Home is near, the quest complete. The golden fleece resting safe aboard the Argo. You think this is the part where triumph swells, where songs rise in victory, but the mood is heavier than celebration. Everyone knows that triumphing Greek stories rarely arrives without a bill attached. The Argo glides into Iolcus, the very place you set out from what feels like years ago. Crowds gather at the shore, eager to see the heroes return. Jason, standing at the prow with the fleece draped over his shoulders, looks every bit the champion. But you, watching closely, notice his eyes flicker not with pride, but with apprehension. Peleus, the usurper king, still rules here, and he is not known for gratitude. Peleus greets you with a smile as thin as parchment. He praises the Argonauts for their courage, but his tone drips with suspicion. You can almost hear him calculating what use the fleece is to him. How best to rid himself of Jason now that the boy has proven inconveniently competent. The reunion feels less like a homecoming and more like a chess match played under torchlight. Medea, standing slightly behind Jason, watches Peleus intently. Her gaze is sharper than any blade. She senses what Jason cannot say aloud, that Peleus will never willingly yield power. And so, as night falls, she begins to weave another plan. The stories differ here. Some say she tricked Peleus' daughters into believing they could restore youth. by chopping their father into pieces and boiling him in a cauldron. Others suggest she promised miracles, offering hope where there should have been none. What's consistent is this: Medea uses a cunning and Peleus does not survive. You hear the screams in the dark, muffled by stone walls. You smell the sharp tang of herbs, see the flicker of fire against the windows. When dawn comes, Peleus is gone, and his daughters stand broken by grief and horror, realizing too late that they were pawns in Medea's vengeance. Jason does not speak of it. He stares at the fleece, at his own hands, and then at Medea, as if trying to decide whether to thank her or fear her. The throne, however, does not fall to Jason. Peleus' son, Acastus, claims it, and Jason is exiled once more. Victory curdles into displacement. You think back to the day you left Iolcus, how the air buzzed with hope, how the promise of glory shimmered ahead. Now the air feels heavy, stale, as if even the gods are tired of this story. The crew disperses slowly, some returning to their homes, others drifting into obscurity. Heroes rarely get clean endings. They fade into farmers, wanderers, nameless bones beneath the soil. The Argo itself, faithful vessel of so many trials, is left to rot on the shore, until even its timbers seem to sigh with memory. Jason and Medea, bound together by vows and by blood, move forward into a future as complicated as the past. Their story does not end here. It spirals into betrayals, revenge, and tragedy fit for another telling. But for now, you close this chapter, letting the weight of it sink gently like an anchor. The golden fleece, once the shining goal of a perilous quest, hangs dull in the hall, its glow dimmed by the shadows of everything it cost. Was it worth it? Historians still argue whether the voyage was a triumph of courage, or a cautionary tale about ambition and divine meddling. You suspect it was both, like most human stories. The sea hums faintly in the background of your thoughts, a reminder of the long nights under stars, the roar of monsters, the songs of the sirens. You survive them all, though the line between survival and ruin feels thin. Perhaps that's the real lesson, that even heroes do not win so much as endure. And now, the journey slows. The oars rest. The wind softens. You let your breath match the calm rhythm of the waves, each exhale a little longer, a little gentler. The faces of the Argonauts blur in memory, voices fading into a kind of hush. Like stories told long ago by firelight, the ship drifts into still waters, no monsters lurking, no gods watching, no debts waiting. Just the sound of water against wood, steady and soothing. You let yourself sink into that sound, into that calm, into the peace that finally comes when the story no longer demands anything from you. The fleece glimmers faintly one last time, like a lantern flickering before sleep. You close your eyes, safe in the quiet of the ending.